Hey, are you guys seeing this?
Hello, guys. This is your boy Shrimp once again, back to you for Art with Adventure. It's been a while. It's been a minute. It's been weeks, I think, that I've ever since I've done my last sketch here in this channel. Last time I did the finalization of the uh, random sketches that I did with, as you can see in the cover photo right now that I've selected here. Yeah, with the anatomies of different kinds of characters, man and female, and also those dinosaurs. And I don't, not dinosaurs. The yeah, you might say as well as dinosaurs. I don't know why I didn't say that immediately. But yeah. So yeah, the animals that I turned into mechs, those guys, and yeah. So that was my last project. Today I will be doing uh, a concept art, I might say, with a bit of a twist because I wanted to uh, be on a trend right now due to me finishing one of the Netflix shows that just recently came out. Wednesday, Wednesday Adams. So I decided to draw her today. So here we are going to draw Miss Wednesday Adams. I've already prepared some references over here in my folder. And also this sketch will be not a, no, not just a sketch, the entire illustration will be recorded as I already did some archive for the uh, yeah, speed paint for this one later. I will upload this after finishing this illustration. But yeah, that will be our project for this coming few days. And with that, also, we will continue with the That Major Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. We're now in chapter 89. If you're reading it in Novels.pl, and we are heading out for another adventure with this story. I pretty much can't remember what was the last time, but we will hear about that once we start listening to the story again. I pretty much we could pretty much know what happened from the last time. The last things that I could remember were uh, him in this. He returned to the his new the city of the Titans with the uh, rescued minor titans that were enslaved, including with the ghost of the ghost of the princess that he turned into. Uh, I think she was a spirit rate or something. Yeah, I think Livia, Princess Livia. She was a fire spirit that can turn mountains into ashes if she could combine her powers with her master. So it's really interesting. Now that he has an AOE type of attack skill that will obliterate the entire mountain if he wants to. But yeah, I think that's enough talking for me. Let's get this arts with adventure going already. Let's start with listening to the story once again, and me starting to, just start sketching, thinking of the post that will be happening here for Miss Wednesday. So yeah, okay, guys, I'll be continuing now. I'll talk to you again later after me doing most of the sketches for today. Okay, so yeah, that's it.
Chapter 89, Acquiring Milk. The pure-breed vampires worshipping Hukaka, the evil god of joyful life, had gathered in a room illuminated by the beautiful moonlight streaming in through the windows. However, one of the 3 chairs was empty. Good grief, things have been far too noisy as of late. Don't you think so, Gubberman? The most disagreeable thing for me is being called out here by you, however, Berkine. At a table that should have seated 3 people, Berkine, who resembled a young nobleman, faced Gubberman, who resembled an evil, elderly mage. Please don't be in such a foul mood, said Berkine. The collection you love so much won't mind you leaving for a little while. More importantly, it would be best to deal with the matter that we have been discussing. If we are not careful, we will lose our balance. The matter that Berkine was referring to was the information leak by the guild master of Ninelands Mages Guild, Kinup, and his subordinates. Thanks to their information, damage had of course been done to Turnisha's faction, who had been making deals with Kinup, but the damage suffered by Berkine and Gubberman's subordinates and those cooperating with them couldn't be ignored, either. The vampires had placed their roots deep in the Amid Empire, but their venomous fangs had been planted just as deep in the Orborn Kingdom. The pure-breed vampires had existed since 100,000 years ago. They knew from experience that if all of their influence was gathered in one country, they would be burned if that country was to fall to ruin. In an era where 2 great nations existed, they would extend their reach into both nations. That was why it was painful that those who had infiltrated the Orborn Kingdom were being hunted down. Lose our balance? Gubberman repeated, and then his wrinkled face twisted as he let out a cackle. When did you grow so faint-hearted, Berkine? No matter how many of our subordinates and those working with them are hunted down, it is impossible for us to be at risk, he said. If we leave them to be hunted down, those humans will eventually be satisfied. There will be none who can reach us, and even if there are, we simply need to kill them. There was some truth to his words. No matter how many of their subordinates were exterminated, the darkness enshrouding the vampires was deep. If blessed with incredible fortune, the humans might be able to play with the Vampire Society's tail. It was absolutely impossible for them to reach the pure-breed vampires at the head of the society. And even if there were some heroes among heroes who managed to reach them, the pure-breed vampires would simply turn on them and kill them. If the pure-breed vampires were on their own, it was possible that they could be defeated by an A-class adventurer party, an S-class adventurer or an S-class adventurer backed up by several A-class adventurers. But they were not on their own. The pure-breed vampires normally competed against each other pointlessly, but they had made a pledge that they would work together to stand against mutual enemies attacking from the outside. Thanks to that, they had even managed to escape when they were attacked 90,000 years ago by heroes with the divine blessings of Bellwood and Ninelord, who had become heroic gods. 5,000 years after that, they had emerged victorious in a battle against pure-breed vampires who worshipped a different evil god. They had been able to overcome many other dangers after that as well. The fact that the faction that worshipped the evil god of joyful life hadn't fallen apart, and the fact that it was now managed in a parliamentary system by the 3 pure-breed vampires, were all because of those experiences. No mutual enemies had appeared during the past 50,000 years, however. That was why Gubberman's words were correct. If the 3 pure-breed vampires worked together, It was likely that they would even be able to defeat the Orborn Kingdom's entire army. If the 5 colored blades were included, things would be a little more difficult, but the result wouldn't change. Their subordinates would likely perish, but they would simply need to make more afterwards. Even the noble-born vampires were nothing more than easily replaced pawns. They would simply need to survive and rebuild their influence in a new darkness. As long as the 3 pure-breed vampires survived, they could rebuild their society. That is indeed true, Berkine said in agreement. No matter how bad things become, there will never be any danger to us. But it is problematic for us to lose too many subordinates and those working with them, isn't it? We live long lives, so daily enrichment is essential for us. Isn't that right, Gubberman? Now that Berkine was saying this to him, even Gubberman had to think about making a move. It was true that he was a powerful being, but in order to perfect his collection of undead made from the corpses of heroes, his efforts alone were not enough. He needed many eyes and ears to gain information and many hands and feet to work on his behalf. But what do you specifically have in mind? Gubberman asked. The information has already been leaked, and it is too late to erase those who know of it. Even if you wanted to have our subordinates disappear, that's right, that Chipira's fellow under Turnisha was defeated as well. Are you planning to make it appear as if all of this was his doing? And Berkine, when will Turnisha be here? Ah, Turnisha won't be coming, Berkine told him. What? That little girl, she has stood us up after I have made the effort of coming out here? No, Gubberman. I never invited Turnisha here. The only one I called here is you. What? What are you playing at, Berkine? It couldn't be. Berkine gave Gubberman a gentle expression as he spoke his next words. This incident was caused by Turnisha's failure. Was Berkine going to proposing to Gubberman that they should feed Turnisha to the humans? Their sworn ally of 100,000 years. Gubberman's eyes opened so wide in surprise that it looked as if they would fall from their sockets, but he quickly saw Berkine's real intentions and twisted his mouth in a smile as he laughed. I see. You intend to weaken Turnisha by throwing her to the humans, and then judge her? In terms of pure strength in battle, Turnisha's was the greatest. However, Berkine had a trump card that he held in reserve. It was a trump card that forced others to obey him. It was powerful but risky. Despite having lived for a mind-boggling number of years, he had only used it a few times in the past. Even if not using it would place his life at risk, he had to be careful in using it. That was the kind of trump card it was. But if there was someone equally powerful to him but weakened to the point of being unable to resist, that would be a time to take a great risk but use this trump card to gain a tremendous return. Turnisha is responsible for this incident, said Berkine. Isn't it only natural for her to take responsibility? I suppose that is one way of thinking about it, said Gubberman. It was the human that Turnisha was using as a subordinate who leaked the information, after all. Yes, and she did something to the tunnel connecting Talersheim to the Hartner Duchy, Berkine added. What? That is the first time I am hearing of this. What are you talking about? Asked Gubberman. The pure-breed vampires who worshipped an evil god had sent numerous subordinates to the Hartner Duchy, which was adjacent to the new national border of the Amid Empire. Turnisha had put a considerable amount of her strength into this, but Berkine and Gubberman had dispatched several of their subordinates there as well. Actually, the adventurers called the 5 colored blades, the ones who are mainly responsible for hunting down Turnisha's subordinates, are doing something interesting, said Berkine. It seems that they are looking for Eleonora. Through those subordinates, Berkine had heard of the movements of Heinz and his party. Eleonora, you say? That cannot be. How are they, people who are in the Orborn Kingdom, searching for a traitor who should be on the other side of the mountain range? Could it be she was there? When the castle sank and the Demon King's seal was removed. Then the fragment of the Demon King is in that little girl's hands? Gubberman was visibly agitated. No, that is not the case, said Berkine, flatly denying that possibility. I am her former owner, after all. I know the limits of her strength. No matter how much more powerful she has grown over the past year, she would be immediately consumed by the Demon King's fragment. If she was the one who removed the Demon King's seal, then she would have been seen rampaging like a beast in Nineland. The one who removed the seal was Eleonora's current master. Her current master, that damp. To think that he has already emerged. So was he behind the incident with Ginarp as well? Asked Gubberman. Most probably, Berkine replied. Eleonora's charming demon eyes only work when eye contact is maintained, so he likely used some other method, however. There were also the incident of a dungeon appearing in the city of Niyaki and the incident where the slave-run mine had turned into a den of skeletons and the mine itself had become an empty plot of land. Berkine and Guberman suspected that Vandali had been involved in these incidents as well. They couldn't imagine what his intentions had been in doing these, however. People measure others by their own standards. In that regard, Berkine and Guberman were very much like people. They would never have been able to imagine that Vandali had wanted to register as an adventurer, that he had investigated the relatives of the undead that they treated as pieces of their collection, or that he had caused this series of events as a result of that investigation. The pure-breed vampires had concluded that Vandali had been after the Demon King's fragment, and that this series of events had been for that purpose. He had undoubtedly released the Demon King's fragments in the southern region of the continent or sought out evil gods other than Hyukaka in order to gain information. It could even be that there had been a sealed fragment of the Demon King near the slave-run mine that Berkine and Guberman didn't know about. And hadn't Tanisha actually known all about all of this? Berkine suspected that she was already communicating with Vandali. Her subordinates had suffered the greatest losses, but it seemed likely that this was all part of the masquerade. Berkine felt this distrust because he had his own plans to make a deal with Vandali and turn him into an ally. Perhaps if the pure-breed vampires had spent 100,000 years building bonds like a blood-related family, then things would be different, but they were currently bound only by their common interests. The trust between them was brittle. If one crack formed in that trust, there would be no preventing it from falling into pieces. I see the one who destroyed the tunnel was Tanisha, wasn't it? If they are plotting something, it makes sense to make Tanisha take the blame, said Guberman. That's how it is now then. Let us get to the main topic of discussion, Guberman, said Berkine. The Hartner Duchy was suffering from the economic recession caused by the Sauron Duchy being occupied by the Amid Empire. But with the recent accident that had caused the castle to sink, the people had been worried that taxes would increase to pay for the castle's repair or the construction of a new castle. Of course, the repair or rebuilding of the castle would be a public project, so there would be opportunities for business as well. However, those who planted crops and ran dairy farms as their main occupations would not receive the benefits of this. A married couple who had barely been able to make a living working a small field were having a discussion late at night while their only son was asleep. If the taxes go any higher, we won't have any choice but to sell Tom. Please wait, dear. He's only 5 years old. If we sell him, he'll be sent to the mines. It was incredibly common for boys too young to be used for physical labor to be sent to places where they would be worked to death, such as the mines. The wife was trying to stop her husband from sentencing their son to such a fate after she had gone through the pain of giving birth to him, but it wasn't as if the husband was willing to sell his own child, either. His face grumbled as he spoke again. But at this rate, even if we feed ourselves on seeds and strangle every single one of our goats, we won't make it through the winter rather than have our whole family starve to death. We have to gamble on the choice that gives us at least a little more hope. You know, Tom is quite smart for his age. I'm sure there will be a master who will buy him and use him as a servant. The man's wife sobbed. If only the rice plants hadn't become sick. The poor farming couple who hadn't been able to harvest a sufficient amount of rice seemed to have decided that they had no choice but to sell their son. But then a miracle happened. Wait, Azan, you must not sell that child. A voice that the couple had heard before reached their ears. However, the voice was one that they had thought they would never hear again. It can't be, Ma? Azan, the husband, opened his eyes wide in shock. Standing before his eyes was his mother, whose corpse had been found in this year's summer, the day after she left to pick some wild plants. Her form was undefined and transparent. The wall behind her could be seen through her body. Mother-in-law. Azan screamed in terror. Please, rest in peace. You must not sell Tom. More importantly, you must tie the family's goats to the outside of the barn's door. And until the morning sun rises, you must keep all the windows closed and not step foot outside the house, the ghost of Azan's dead mother said to the couple who were trembling in fear. The goats. Azan repeated. Azan, listen to what your mother tells you, said the ghost. Listen to me. Leave your seeds outside the barn's door. Wait inside the house and do not leave until the morning sun rises. If you do that, then something good, the goddess Vida's blessings will be upon you. Vida, you say, Ma? Didn't you convert to believe in Eldasama? Azan asked his mother. Without answering her son's question, Azan's mother's spirit quietly vanished without a trace. The couple stared blankly at the place where the spirit had appeared for a while before looking at each other and nodding. Mother-in-law did love Tom, didn't she? Said Azan's wife. That's right, those goats are soon going to be too old to squeeze any milk out of them anyway. "Let's try believing in Ma," said Azan. Azan and his wife tied the goats to the barn's door and waited for morning as they had been instructed. When the sun rose, something astonishing had happened. There was a person-sized doll made of clay standing on the spot where the sack of seeds had been. If Azan and his wife had any knowledge of Japanese history, they would wonder what an earthen figure was doing here, but there was something that Azan was even more concerned about. At the earthen figure's feet, there was a wooden club that he had never seen before. Thinking that he was meant to break the earthen figure open with it, he picked up the club and struck the earthen figure. The earthen figure easily split open, and boxes and bags filled with food and treasure fell out from inside, one after another. Salt, there's so much salt. There's enough for a year. And this one is wheat. These bottles are there's even oil and vinegar. Honey, aren't these silver coins? There are even some gold coins mixed in with them. And this shiny thing here, could it be a gemstone? The value of the food and treasures inside the earthen figure were dozens of times more than the pitiful amount that they would have gained by selling their only son. Not only would they not have to sell Tom, but they would easily survive the winter and have more than enough left over to buy new, young goats. Ah, thank you, Mother. Goddess Vida-sama, thank you very much. Azan cried. Vandali, who was surrounded by earthen figure-shaped golems in a plain covered thickly in tall grass a little distance away from the village, was pleased with himself as he looked at the results of his actions. Goats, rabbits, seeds for southern rice, multiple kinds of beans that we don't have in Taylorsheim, seeds and seedlings of fruits that aren't sold in the cities because they spoil easily. This is superb, he said to himself. Seeing how happy the farming families were, including Azan and his wife, Vandali did think that he could have taken a little more, but it wasn't a big problem. The ghosts of Hannah and the others who had been killed by Kanata had told him the locations of several poor farming villages in the Hartner Duchy, flew to them and gathered the spirits in order to secure the people he needed to negotiate. And through these spirits, which he had used visualization on to make them visible to normal people, he had offered his trades. There were several families who ignored the offers, but many villagers of the deeply religious farming villages had believed the spirits and accepted Vandali's trades. As a result, Vandali had gained a lot. There hadn't been any farming horses or cows that could help with work on the farms, but he had acquired several animals like goats and rabbits that could be raised just by feeding them grass, whose manure could be used as fertilizer. He had acquired the oldest animals in the trades, but there would be no problem if he used youth transformation on them. The items he had given in return had been things that he had acquired in dungeons or from bandits that he had encountered and exterminated along the way, so he didn't feel any loss from giving them away. I'm not in a social position where I can buy livestock and seeds normally. Vandali wasn't the owner of a farm or a pasture, so he would stand out considerably if he tried to buy living livestock and seeds. That was why he was acquiring these through a method like this. Click 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 click. Pete, you mustn't eat those yet, said Vandali, stopping Pete, who had extended half of his body from Vandali's head towards one of the rabbits. We have to breed them properly first. Tomato stew with rabbit meat garnished with goat milk cheese. It was the rabbits rather than Pete who had frozen in fear of Vandali's unconcealed hunger as the earthen figure golems stored them inside their hollow bodies. Now then, let's move to the dungeon I created yesterday. I want a few more goats. Vandali left the plane behind, followed by the earthen figure golems that were useful for transporting things. And then he repeated the same thing in several villages. With this, all kinds of livestock were introduced to Taylorsheim. In addition, the goddess Vida's religion became more active in the Hartner Duchy's farming villages. A custom spread where the believers offered the crops harvested that year to dolls made of clay during harvest festivals, and then everyone would break the dolls the next day and take the broken pieces home with them as good luck charms. The members of the Five Colored Blades sighed in frustration that their investigation was not going well. It's not going well after all, said Heinz. You're right about that, said Edgar. Just where did she disappear? To the rumor that vampires can turn into fog is just a superstition, right? It's mostly just a superstition, said Diana. However, it is said that there were once vampires who possessed a unique skill to do so. Heinz and his companions had been chasing after Eleonora, defeating vampires who would probably have information on her and questioning them, but no results were to be had. After she was seen in Nineland, there wasn't a single trace of Eleonora anywhere. The vampires that Heinz's party had defeated with Ginup's information had known that Eleonora was a traitor, but hadn't known where she currently was or what she was doing. In fact, they had been surprised, wondering why Heinz and his party were looking for Eleonora. And since taking Chippiras alive would have been an impossible task even for Heinz's party, they had only been able to question his underlings. They had tried finding someone with the spiritualist job to try and question Chippiras, but no spiritualist had been able to communicate with the spirits of powerful vampires. From the limited information available, Heinz had concluded that the vampires had been instructed to report any sightings of Eleonora rather than having been instructed to look for her, and that Eleonora's master was considered to be an individual of far greater importance than Eleonora herself. This was because Ternisha and the other pure-breed vampires had limited the information they provided to their underlings. As a result, rather than gaining information regarding Eleonora from the vampires, Heinz and his party had inadvertently informed Berkine that Eleonora had appeared in the Hartner Duchy. Unaware of this, they had continued searching, but they couldn't find any leads at all. Good grief, it really is strange. Even if noble-born vampires can fly, it's not like they can stay in the sky all day. So why can't we find any leads? Jennifer wondered. But both Eleonora and Vandali were now outside the party's search area of Niyaki and the duchy's capital, so it was only natural that they couldn't find any leads. If Heinz's party had visited the cultivation villages to the south, they might have been able to learn of Vandali and make the connection between him and Eleonora, but when the incident had occurred at the slave-run mine, they had been near Nineland, so they hadn't had the opportunity to visit the cultivation villages. Well, we were unable to find the criminal who undid the champion's seal and released the Demon King's fragment, but our actions were not in vain, said Diana. But our actions were not in vain, said Diana. Not vain for us as adventurers, or vain in the fact that we are protecting Solon. The five-colored blades had defeated well over 100 vampires, if including the subordinate vampires. They had even been acknowledged as saints by the Church of Alder. Their pockets were quite warm with the rewards they had received for defeating the vampires as well as the spoils of war taken from the vampires themselves. Heinz's promotion to S-class was becoming a reality. The more the vampires' numbers were reduced by Heinz and his party, the safer the damp girl Solon was. That was why their efforts hadn't been entirely pointless, but we should change the way we're conducting our search, said Heinz. I think the fact that we have no leads whatsoever means that we've overlooked something. The party was now sitting in the Adventurers Guild, discussing how they should conduct their search. There had been a suggestion to see the ruins of the slave-run mine with their own eyes despite having already seen the search report, and another suggestion to investigate other known locations of champions' seals. However, they were completely oblivious to the conversation that was going on behind them. But even if they did notice it and were interested in its contents, they would have thought that it had nothing to do with their search. Did you hear? They apparently appeared in Yauda village as well, the goddess's clay doll's armors. By clay doll's armors, do you mean those rumors? Where the spirits of dead parents or siblings appear and tell you to offer your aged livestock and seeds outside in the middle of the night. And then when morning comes, there's a clay doll standing in their place with food and money inside? Yeah, those rumors. Geez, I wish I could get some of that luck. Can't they visit our house? But your parents and brothers? Yeah, they're alive. Grandpa and Grandma are still going strong, too. Then there's no way that the clay dolls will come, is there? And you're a shoemaker, aren't you? What are you planning to offer? Suppose you're right. Ha, I went out and got nothing again. I went to exterminate some bandits to find that they'd all been killed by monsters, and all of their treasure was gone as well. Maybe they had a fight amongst themselves or someone took revenge on them, all of their throats were slit. That was the work of a real pro. You as well? We didn't have any luck, either. Well, our prey was ghouls rather than bandits, though. The venom on their fangs can be used for medicine, and the manes of the males are selling for more these days because they make for good materials, but for some reason, I haven't seen them around recently. I wonder if the slave traders hired someone to do it? I've heard the females suffer quite a lot when trained. Really? Those guys would have killed the males and taken their magic stones. But there weren't any male corpses left in the remains of the village. Hey, don't you smell something? I smell a conspiracy. I'm sure the many events that have been occurring recently are somehow connected in secret. I know this for sure. Roger, have you already had something to drink? Keep your drunk conspiracies under control. In truth, as the adventurer named Roger had said, these things were all connected. They were all the doing of Vandali and his companions. The goddess's clay dolls were obviously Vandali's work, but he had also conducted the extermination of the numerous bandit groups in passing, using them to gain bomb coins as bargaining tools, improving his unarmed fighting technique skill and using them as prey to earn experience for Pete and the others. Listening to the spirits, he had frequently encountered evil bandits who had committed murder many times, so he had ended up annihilating the bandit groups one after another despite the fact that the Adventurers Guild would normally send extermination requests for them. And the fact that ghouls had been disappearing from the devil's nests of the Hartner Duchy was because Vandali had gone around inviting them to live in his nation after learning the locations of devil's nests where ghouls lived from the guild receptionist who had been killed by Kanatu and from Luciliano who had previously worked as an adventurer. He had started doing this because it annoyed him that the ghouls were being hunted by the adventurers of the Hartner Duchy, but the ghouls had fallen to their knees and bowed before him at the mere sight of him. It seemed that when ghouls saw Vandali, they felt as if a god had descended upon them. His leveled-up death attribute charm skill as well as his Ghoul King and Holy Son of Vida titles appeared to be doing their work. After that, all there was left to do was creating tiny-scale dungeons inside the devil's nests and using underhanded tricks to take them back to Talersheim. The ghouls' leaders would have fistfights with Vigoro or compare their magic against Zadyrus's. Once they decided who was superior, they would obey Vigoro and Zadyrus as well, so there were no problems after the ghouls' migration. But many of the ghouls had been unaware that their race had been created by Vida, and were very surprised to learn this truth. It seemed that living in isolated, individual devil's nests was a problem for the ghouls. Incidentally, it seemed that there were no villages of Vida's other races in the Hartner Duchy. There were apparently some in the former Sauron Duchy, but the security around the national border was strict at the moment, so Vandali planned to sneak into the Sauron Duchy to obtain rice seeds later when the security was more relaxed. And so, Vandali acquired some essentials, livestock and farming crops, and visited his mother's distant relatives, the ghouls who were created by the goddess Vida, just as he had told Kasim and his friends he would. Incidentally, while Heinz and his party were having their discussion, they learned that there were strange, small dungeons that were difficult to even call E-class recently appearing one after another in the Hartner Duchy and decided to follow this trail. All of them were dungeons that Vandali had created with the labyrinth construction skill to use as a method of transport, abandoned after he was done using them. Heinz's party wasn't entirely off the mark, but they didn't gain anything from this, either. Nobody but Vandali could teleport from dungeon to dungeon, after all. And around the start of winter, Vandali headed for the cultivation villages to make sure that they would get through the winter just fine. The equipment is packed, right? Everything is organized. All right, let's go. Karkan, who was mounted on horseback, left the city of Niaki with the unit under his command, Froto and 2 carriages of equipment. They initially headed north before leaving the highway to take a side road south. All in order to conceal their true destination and goal, which was to disguise themselves as bandits and attack the cultivation villages to the south. Chapter 90, Let's go, you sorry bastards. It wasn't snowing yet, but cold enough for the breath of the men in the unit led by the Knight Karkan to turn white as they took the side road south. There were about 50 of them, and although they belonged to the Knight's Order, only 3 men other than Karkan, including the vice-captain, had formerly been decorated as knights. The unit was made up of those with the social position of equestrians, future knight candidates and the apprentices of knights. They were less skilled than knights, but equal to or slightly above the average soldier. They were wearing old leather armor with numerous patches and stitches rather than suits of armor and helmets bearing the crest of the Hartner Duchy. At one glance, they appeared to be an orderly mercenary band. This is certainly not a pleasant mission, but this is for the sake of Lord Lucas, for the sake of the Hartner Duchy's future and for the sake of our people. Don't make those faces, you look like the remnants of a defeated army, said Karkan. But is this really necessary? Isn't Lord Lucas's succession to the family already almost certain at this point? A man asked, voicing his opinion. He was Froto, the spy who was participating in this mission as a staff officer, the man whom Vandali believed to be a virtuous priest of Alder. Lord Lucas was the eldest son but his mother was a concubine, so people had thought it would be difficult for him to succeed the family. But as Froto said, Lord Lucas's succession to the family was now more or less decided. The great scandal caused by Kinup, the former guild master of the Mages Guild, and his subordinates, who revealed that numerous noblemen had connections with vampires who worshipped an evil god. Lord Belton, the second son born to the Duke's legal wife, had been almost certain to succeed the family, but he had been caught up in the big waves caused by this scandal. He had managed to protect himself, but the fact that his subordinates had been working with the vampires had been revealed, so he had withdrawn from the dispute to succeed the family. Becoming a duke in the Orborn kingdom meant gaining the rights to be a candidate to become the king. Those of the other duchies and the current king himself had expressed their opinions one after another that they couldn't entrust this position to someone whose followers had been traitors to humanity. Meanwhile, Lord Lucas had given a performance where he conducted a strict investigation to find out if any of his supporters had connections to vampires and personally hunted and sentenced them. Lord Belton was trying to appeal his innocence by doing things such as hiring the 5 colored blades, but people already doubted him. People wondered whether he was simply a lizard sacrificing its own tail to survive. Now that he had lost the people's confidence and his prominent supporters, every church, including the Church of Elder, had distanced themselves from him and nobody sympathized with him. Lord Belton had lost his standing. Of course, the worst-case scenario was that he would be taken somewhere to rest to recover from a sudden illness or be made to live a religious life in a remote church somewhere, so the result of losing his standing wasn't particularly unsatisfactory. Once Lord Lucas succeeded the Duke, Lord Belton would live on as the head of the Branch family. And it seemed that the current Duke Hartner wouldn't last until the spring. With the circumstances as they were now, Lord Lucas's succession to the family was all but confirmed. Frodo couldn't be blamed for doubting whether there was any meaning in crushing Lord Belton's cultivation project now. But Karkan whispered in Frodo's ear. "You may say that, Frodo Dono, but if you do nothing now, you will return to your previous meaningless position." Frodo's face stiffened. He had been content with his meaningless position in the Mages Guild, but the reason he had disguised himself as a priest and gone around the cultivation villages gathering information was all for the sake of becoming one of the Duke's personal mages. He had gone through a lot of trouble in order to become more renowned. That trouble would all go to waste at this rate. Either you perform one more job and acquire the reward you wanted, or receive thanks for your cooperation up until now and a little money before returning to your original position. "It is one or the other," said Karkan. "I understand," said Frodo. Being pressed like this, he was unable to refuse. The truth was that the actions of Karkan and his unit would not be of any benefit to Lord Lucas. In fact, it would cause slight harm. But Karkan's seniors had been busy dealing with a recent series of events. They hadn't given him any orders to cancel the plan to destroy the cultivation project. "Stand by for now." That was the order that Karkan had been given. Lord Lucas himself and the high-ranking members of the Knights Order supporting him had made it clear that now was not the time to make careless moves. But Karkan had read too much into this, assuming that he had essentially been told, "We have no expectations of you lot anymore, so don't make a move." He feared that he would be discarded for not having been of any use in Lord Lucas's victory in the dispute to succeed the Duke. Now, he was trying to execute his originally devised plan of having his unit pretend to go on an expedition, enter a side road far from the city, disguise themselves as bandits and destroy the cultivation villages. If one just thought calmly for a moment, they would give up on such a plan, but as Karkan had been assigned to do all the dirty work, his sense of suspicion was greater than most people. His perspective had grown narrow. If he didn't make a move, would the consequences he had threatened Frodo with not also happen to him? That was how paranoid his thoughts were. But Karkan showed not the slightest sign of having been driven into such a mentality as he looked around the unit he was in charge of. He had managed to convince Frodo. He was carrying on silently alongside the fake traveling merchant who had been a spy right from the beginning. But the morale of the other men didn't look high. Things won't go well at this rate, he thought. The cultivation villages had no significant ability to defend themselves in battle. The largest village was the 7th cultivation village with a population of 250, none of them were soldiers in occupation. There were 3 former refugees who were adventurers, but according to the information available, they were E-class adventurers whose D-class promotion had only just become a realistic dream for them. In terms of ability, they were probably no different from the equestrians of Karkan's unit. With 50 armed men, it wouldn't be difficult to slaughter the entire village. They would need to be careful of the adventurers, but there would be no problems if they did. The only concern was the damp boy. He had fled the city for some reason, so his whereabouts were currently unknown, but even if by some tiny chance he was in the cultivation villages right now, he was only about as strong as a D-class adventurer other than his healing magic, or so they thought. If the true knights with Frodo's enchantments, including Karkan, surrounded the villages, they would be able to dispose of the people in the villages one-sidedly. But the low morale wasn't good. If they were careless, unexpected failures could occur. Villagers might survive after seeing their faces, or even kill one of Karkan's men when they let their guard down. Karkan wanted to avoid that. Deciding that it couldn't be helped, he spoke to his men to get them into the mood to work. "Gentlemen, I know this mission is an unpleasant task," he said. "Even if we succeed, officially speaking, we will have done nothing more than conducted an expedition, so we will not be praised for our work. However, due to the nature of the mission, it is necessary for us to disguise ourselves as bandits. And what is it that bandits do when they attack helpless villages?" At first, the equestrians gave Karkan a puzzled look before suddenly being taken aback at what he meant. What bandits did in villages was pillaging, violence, rape and kidnapping. "Commanding officer? Is that really all right?" Equestrians lived their everyday lives under strict discipline. As they were those who would soon succeed their true knight parents, they had to motivate themselves to learn the art of combat and study academic subjects on a regular basis. They had to become an example for the soldiers. In the future, they would command soldiers and defend their nation with their swords. Because of the position they were in, they couldn't openly enjoy gourmet foods and drinks or make love to the women of the red light districts. Especially since the Sauron Duchy had fallen to the Amid Empire, there was a lingering atmosphere that they needed to be ready for combat at all times, so they couldn't loosen their restraints by even the smallest amount. These were the equestrians that Karkan was speaking to. "Of course," he said. "But we will not be kidnapping anyone. Once you have enjoyed them like bandits, dispose of them like bandits. Don't loosen your restraints too much just because there is no risk of making any children. Those who injure their backs and can't ride their horses will be dragged back by force." The equestrians were suddenly excited. Some of them were more in anticipation of the extra money they would earn rather than the women, but given the strange circumstances of being told that they could rape the women as much as they liked, most of them were unable to hide their excitement. Frodo turned pale as he imagined what the men would do in the cultivation villages. His original role had been that of an informant. He had never imagined that he would have to directly witness the villagers suffering and being killed. He would suffer a greater impact by seeing the corpses with his own eyes and watching the villagers suffering as they died. But now that he had come this far, he couldn't say that he would quit, nor could he escape. If you are going to resent anyone, resent the Amid Empire who took your homeland from you. I have done nothing wrong, all I wanted was to gain a social position befitting of someone like me, thought the fake priest, shifting the responsibility away from himself. Having gone around the villages and seen that their preparations for winter had gone well, Vandali performed his usual healings and secretly stationed golems at each village before returning to the 7th cultivation village. He caught rank 2 blood-sucking rats on the way there. He had the owner of the Jack-of-all-trades store cook their meat, which was richer than it appeared, and shared it with everyone. And then he stayed the night in the same room as Kasim and his friends. Things are going well for now, he thought. Now that the slave-run mine was gone, traveling merchants no longer came to the cultivation villages, but it seemed that there would be no problems lasting until spring. Once it became warmer, Kasim and his party would have to escort the young men to buy things at the city, however. While they were there, they planned to consult the Commerce Guild to see if they could arrange other traveling merchants to visit the cultivation villages. Despite not being citizens of Taylorsheim, these people were people who adored Vandali. Despite it having been for the sake of rescuing the Titan slaves, he felt a little guilty that he had caused such an inconvenience to the village. If the Fangs of Dark Knights were still functioning, I would have been able to take measures against that, but I wonder if these people would come to my nation? If they did that, Vandali wouldn't have to hold back when it came to various things. He would be able to give them houses, furniture and food and offer them work, just like he had done with the people from the first cultivation village. He would be able to have them eat delicious dinosaur meat, fully seasoned with all kinds of flavors, instead of preserved gobu-gobu. There wouldn't be any need to station dozens of Lima lookouts, stone golems and death iron golems at every village. No matter what the Hartner family did, they would be able to live in safety inside Taylorsheim, which was currently having its 6th outer wall built. It did occur to Vandali that he should just tell the villagers everything. But that would be equivalent to pressing the people of the cultivation villages to separate themselves from human society. Vandali wasn't confident that this would lead to their happiness. If the Hartner Duchy was a little more trustworthy, if the innermost members of its government and guilds didn't have connections to the pure-breed vampires, then he would have had more options. However, in the end, the pure-breed vampires and Heinz's party are in my way. I have to erase them somehow or at least reduce their numbers. If Vandali took direct measures, the pure-breed vampires would interfere. If he took indirect measures, Heinz's party would interfere. The pure-breed vampires and Heinz's party were supposed to be enemies to each other, but they were hindering Vandali as if they had joined forces. I could get rid of one member under the right circumstances. If things go well from there but I suppose it's dangerous to presume that there is a chance of things going well. I don't know how much they were cornered by the information I made in up reveal. If the timing doesn't match up, the spirits of Chipiras and the other vampires were horribly damaged, so I can't get any good information out of them. With Isla's information alone, Heinz's party had done things in a flashy way. Thanks to that, the lemurs stationed in the sky over the city had been enough to let Vandali know that battles had been occurring, and he had been able to find the spirits of the dead to communicate with them, but couldn't anything be done about heavy damage to spirits? Vandali had turned the hound Isla, one of Ternisha's 5 dogs that were her trusted retainers, into an undead straight away, so there was almost no damage to her memory. But the spirit of the fine dog Chipiras, who had been split in two by Heinz, was damaged all over. The only other spirits Vandali could obtain were those of the mad dog and the fighting dog. The fifth, the foolish dog, was apparently not moving from a hiding place. Vandali just hoped that he could get good information from the mad dog and the fighting dog. As these thoughts ran through his mind, he looked at the room's ceiling, which he could see clear as day thanks to his dark vision skill. He couldn't fall asleep. For some reason, Pete and the other insects that Vandali had equipped inside his body with the insect binding technique skill were moving around inside him late at night, disturbing his quiet sleep with the sensation of them squirming beneath his skin. It tickled, so he was inadvertently letting out stifled laughter. The status effect resistance skill kept sleep deprivation at bay, so Vandali was completely awake now. There's no helping it, he thought, deciding to get up. Sunrise was close. Vandali decided to pass the time by doing some morning training. He silently crawled out of the bunk bed, spread a handkerchief-sized piece of tanned leather on the floor so as to not wake Kasim and his friends who were still sleeping, and then began to do push-ups with his tongue. It was harsh training that required not his arms, but his tongue extended with the body extension, tongue, skill, to support his entire body weight. The tongue was a muscle, so it would surely be very effective training. It would be quite the problem if he were to be seen by Kasim and his friends, but the three of them were humans and they couldn't really see in the dark, so there wouldn't be any problems if he just stopped right after they woke up. But Vandali did only a few of these push-ups before stopping. The lemurs stationed around the village had detected several shadows of what appeared to be bandits. Who are these guys? Through the lemurs, he could see a group of several dozen armed men wearing leather armor and cloths over their faces. Seeing this, Vandali would assume they were just bandits, but for some reason, many of them were riding horses. 1 or 2 bandits might have been normal, but there were around 20 mounted men. They were all sturdy horses. The one at the front carrying a man holding a kite shield was particularly sturdy looking, so muscular that Vandali would feel the urge to touch it. Normal bandits might have carriages to carry the items they pillaged, but they would not have a cavalry. Horses cost money to feed, as they didn't simply eat anything they were given, and they were normally cowardly creatures. And the bandits themselves were farmers and residents of slums who had gone broke, so they didn't have the technique for fighting on horseback. That was why having war horses would just be a waste of money to feed. Selling those horses would actually yield more profit than attacking one small village. In fact, Vandali had never encountered a single mounted bandit among all of the bandit groups he had attacked and robbed. Then maybe these bandits are mercenaries who have gone broke. There were people in Lambda who would normally do mercenary work, then act as bandits to make a living when there was no work available. And because such people sold their strength on the battlefield to earn their money, they were far stronger than normal bandits. At the very least, they were stronger than ordinary soldiers, possessed skills and used martial skills. Though it was late, Vandali now felt a reaction from danger sense, death. At this rate, it was possible that the village would be annihilated. No, its annihilation was certain. This is bad, he muttered to himself. As enemies, they weren't a threat to Vandali. If the bandit group were to aiming only for Vandali, he would be able to overwhelm them, just like he had done with the Goblin King and the pack of 1,000 goblins. The difficult thing was to defeat them without losing any of the villagers as casualties. If he held back as he had been doing up until now, he would definitely lack the manpower to accomplish this. There was no helping it. Vandali decided to get a little serious. He quickly cast energy absorption and bloodshed enhancement on the equipment of Kasim's party that was in the room. And then he used his scream skill to let out a loud voice, waking up Kasim's party. It is a bandit attack. An attack? On this village? Even though they were novices, they were adventurers. Despite being surprised, they got out of bed quickly. Vandali quickly explained the situation to them. "Several dozen strong bandits are closing in on the village," he said. "What? Really?" "Yes, my insects have told me." Vandali had noticed the bandits so quickly because he had been unable to sleep due to Pete and the other insects had been making so much noise, so this wasn't exactly a lie. Hearing this, the three young adventurers hastily began equipping their weapons and armor. "If it was Fester saying it, we would have doubted him," said Kasim. "We trust you because it's you, Vandali," said Zeno. "Unlike me, you don't say things while half asleep," Fester added. It seemed that he had a history of speaking nonsense while half asleep. "But will we be enough to handle strong bandits?" asked Zeno. "Don't complain, there are dozens of them. Even if we are not enough, we have no choice but to do this," said Kasim. There was audible tension in their voices. "I think you'd manage if you were fighting them one-on-one," Vandali told them. "I've applied enchantment." Voices. "I think you'd manage if you were fighting them one-on-one," Vandali told them. "I've applied enchantments, too." In fact, yesterday, Kasim's party had told him that they would soon be allowed to take the D-class promotion examination, so they were already stronger than average soldiers. As long as they could kill people and have their minds stay normal after killing them, there was no way that they would lose in a one-on-one battle. But surprisingly, it wasn't Kasim or Zeno, but Fester who called out to Vandali with a serious look on his face. "Hey, Vandali. Do you have any tips for fighting people?" They seemed to have sensed that Vandali was experienced in fighting other people while they repeated their training and practice battles with him. Since the only human-shaped creatures they had killed so far were goblins and kobolds, they were asking him for advice. "Tips?" Vandali repeated. He was hard-pressed to answer this question. He had killed multiple people with his own hands, drank their blood and used their corpses as undead, but he didn't remember thinking anything in particular about doing so. For him, killing people was no different from preparing fish after catching them. Meanwhile, the bandits had made their preparations for the attack. They were split into three groups. The archers and infantry would go around to surround the village, and once they were in position, half of the cavalry would attack the front gate facing the highway while the other half would attack the smaller rear gate. The cavalry would cause chaos while the archers and infantry would bring down the fleeing villagers. Golems, activate. Exterminate the enemies as they approach. Princess Livia and the other ghosts, stay transparent and stand by in the sky. What advice should I give Fester? Vandali's head was working hard, using the parallel thought processing skill to give orders to the lemures and golems as well as telling Livia and the other ghosts to stand by. The response he gave in the end was a cliché one. "Imagine what will happen if you don't fight or what will happen when you are defeated," he told Fester. "Imagine?" "Yes. What will the bandit group do to this village? What will they do with Lena-san, if we are defeated?" Lena was the poster girl of the Jack-of-all-trades store, the sole employee of the Adventurers Guild branch in the village. What the bandit group would do upon finding a young woman like her didn't need explaining. Fester, who had feelings for her, gripped his sword tightly. "All right. I'm still not confident that I can kill someone, but I'll leave the feelings of fear and vomiting for afterwards," he said. Vandali had used a line that he had seen a heroine in a manga on Earth say to encourage the protagonist who disliked fighting, but it seemed to have been more effective than he had expected. I was contemplating between this and telling him to imagine that his enemies are pumpkins or something, but I suppose this was the right choice. "Don't worry. I'm the shield bearer, I'll protect you properly," said Kasim. "I'll watch your back, but I'm not going to pat it," said Zeno. "Ask Lena to do that for you afterwards." "No, I didn't mean that I'd actually vomit sheet." "Vandali, where should we go?" Fester asked. "Do we go to the front gate?" "I'll leave the back gate to you," said Vandali. "Around 10 mounted men will come that way, please hold out until I arrive. Tell the villagers not to leave their houses. I'll handle things at the front gate." "All right." Normally, they would stop a boy half their age saying that he would handle things on his own. But Kasim's party knew that Vandali was so strong that they couldn't defeat him even if all three of them attacked him at once. They watched him open the wooden door and fly out without stopping him before heading for the back gate. "Attack! Attack! Bandit attack! Close your doors and stay in your houses." Vandali was using the scream skill to warn the villagers who would slowly be waking up around this time. "It's so noisy. Could it be that they've noticed us?" asked one of Kakan's subordinates, seemingly afraid. "Even if they have, the plan does not change," Kakan shouted, drawing his sword. He had a bad feeling about the high-pitched voice that he could hear coming from the village, but he ignored it and commenced the plan. Don't hold back, pillage and kill. This is for the sake of justice. Let's go, you sorry bastards. He roared. Seeing their commander charge forward, the equestrians disguised as bandits let out violent war cries as they followed. Hi! They really came? You stupid fool, stay calm. The men who had been keeping watch at the front gate during the night trembled with pale faces at the fearsome war cries and hoofbeats drawing closer. It seemed that bandits were far more terrifying than goblins or wild beasts. Doctor. We'll leave the rest to you. Let's see here, said Vandali, whom many had started to call doctor because he had been conducting medical treatments every time he visited the village. He prepared his method for killing all of the bandits. These men were probably mercenaries acting as bandits, but they were nothing but small fry for Vandali with his current power. He would simply need to fire death bullets as they approached and swing his claws a few times, and that would be the end. But they were riding horses. The horses should provide quite a bit of income for this village. He wanted to leave the horses alive. If the wind had been blowing the other way, he could have just released volatile paralyzing venom into the air, but unfortunately, the village was downwind. Now then, I'm counting on you, he said. 8 spears of black flames appeared. Is this magic? One of the villagers cried. Yes, this is fire attribute magic, said Vandali, lying without hesitation as he released a dead spirit magic spell. I'll destroy the gate with my martial skill, follow me, Ga. A spear of black fire pierced the chest of the man at the front who was raising his sword. A second and third spear followed, incinerating the internal organs of the man, of Karkan. Karkan opened his eyes wide in astonishment as he stared at small, white-haired boy floating above the wooden gate. Impossible? He wasn't just a user of healing magic and the unarmed fighting technique? With the astonishment still etched on his face, he tumbled off his horse. Captain? Karkan don't know. Seeing Karkan's subordinates and Froto stop their horses, their formation falling apart, Vandali saw a chance and released more spears of black flames and threw kunais at them. Hijur? Stone wall. Gwa? Ga, it's poison. There's poison on the Kaha. One after another, Karkan's subordinates had their chests pierced and their organs burned from the inside, or fell to the poison on the kunais made by Daitara and Terra, which had also been turned into cursed weapons. There were some who immediately raised their shields and used their martial skills, but martial skills like Stone Wall with level 1 shield technique were meaningless against Vandali's dead spirit magic and throwing skills. The kunai that he had turned into cursed weapons, made of dragon bones and death iron, thrown with his level 4 superhuman strength, were about as powerful as cannonballs. And since they were coated with poison, even a graze would spell the end for these men. Froto, who had been at the back, let out a scream of terror as he tried to flee. Vandali raised a kunai to throw into his back, but upon hearing the words of the spirits of Karkan and his men, who had approached him due to the death attribute charm affecting them because they had died, he stopped. Pete, everyone, please capture him alive. Several dozen insectoid monsters, including Pete, flew out of Vandali's body and chased after Froto. He had his remaining insects inject paralyzing venom into the horses and used death attribute magic to turn the bandits who were still breathing into ashes. You didn't have to go that far, one of the villagers murmured. They were still breathing, so I had to do it just in case, said Vandali, lying to them again. He had now lied to them so many times that he had lost count. But he had no choice. These bandits, Karkan and his men, were knights of this nation. Vandali hadn't heard the fine details of why they had attacked this cultivation village yet, but things have turned out badly. Now that it's come to this, I have to kill the knights so they can't be recognized, he thought as he turned around. By the way, what are those insect-looking things? They are my pleasant companions, said Vandali. You don't have to worry about them. Now then, I'm going to take a look at the back gate. Hearing the villagers' shouts of all right. And we're leaving it to you. Behind him, Vandali headed for the back gate where Kasim and his friends were fighting. Doctor was a tamer, huh? Yeah, he's amazing. Ah, but should we say something to him about bringing them into the village without mentioning them? Maybe we should. He did cure my athlete's foot only yesterday, though. Now that you mention it, he did something about my toothache as well. I suppose we'll just give him a slight warning. Yeah? The gate guards, who were now tying the horses up so that they wouldn't run away, didn't know that insectoid monsters had been deemed untamable by the Tamers Guild. This was the level of knowledge of people who had never actually seen a tamer. Chapter 91, it would have been good if nothing happened, but in terms of actually protecting the village, the battle to defend the 7th cultivation village from Karkan's unit of knights disguised as bandits was going well. By the time Vandali killed Karkan, half of the 30 archers and infantry surrounding the village had already been killed. You are a Gillum. Whoa. What the hell is this slime? The equestrians who were on standby after surrounding the village should have only needed to be shooting the villagers who had barely escaped with their lives. The only things that approached them were stone golems and golems made of liquid death iron, which looked like slimes at first glance. The golems that Vandali had diligently made and placed in the ground were 10 rank 3 stone golems and 3 rank 7 liquid death iron golems. All of them were affected by his strength and followers and strength and subordinates skills. They were as powerful as monsters 1 or 2 ranks above them. If the equestrians were all gathered together, even if they couldn't defeat the golems, at least half of them would have been able to escape because the golems were slow to move. But because they had been surrounding the village, they were all separated. Why are there so many golems and black slimes in a place where there are only supposed to be goblins? Shouted the final knight, before being covered and engulfed completely by a death iron golem. The death iron was a liquid, but it was just as heavy as the iron it had originally been made from. And since the golem had its own superhuman strength as well, escape after being swallowed by it would be impossible without a tremendous amount of physical strength. And then the golems groaned as they carried the equestrians' corpses to the small-scale dungeon that Vandali had created in order to hide them. Kasim and his party were putting up a good fight against the 10 mounted bandits. Stone shield. Shield bash. Unable to withstand the blow of Kasim's strength and shield that he had swung with all his might, one of the equestrians fell off his horse. Zeno aimed for that fallen equestrian, but one of the other equestrians stood in his way, blocking his line of fire. "Are you trying to show off?" shouted the equestrian. Fortunately for him, the leather armor he was wearing was lighter than what he normally used, so he got to his feet quickly. As usual, Kasim's skill level was still too low to use shield bash. "It's the embodiment of my fighting spirit," he yelled back. They were being forced to fight 3 against 10, they wouldn't last without some fighting spirit. Fester was swinging his sword bravely next to Kasim as well. Lena, I'll protect you." Triple thrust. He used a swordsmanship martial skill, releasing 3 swift, consecutive thrusts, aiming at one of the enemies on horseback. The equestrian twisted his body to avoid the first thrust, deflected the second with his own sword and was hit by the third, though the third thrust only took a little flesh off his side. "There's your weakness." Triple thrust was a martial technique with 3 consecutive thrusts at a fearsome speed, but once the 3 thrusts were endured, there was an opening where the user was vulnerable. The equestrian knew this and had planned to launch a counterattack after enduring the 3 thrusts despite having suffered a slight wound, but all of his vitality was taken away by what was supposed to be a light wound in his side, sapping his strength. This was the effect of the bloodshed enhancement enchantment on Fester's sword. Zaya. Finding the equestrian's opening instead, his regular thrust slipped through a gap in the equestrian's armor. The equestrian's eyes rolled back as he fell off his horse. Anton. WHO's next. Fester roared. "Come at me. I won't let you lay a single finger on Linera." He was making full use of Vandali's advice to endure mental shock of having killed someone for the first time. "Who is that?" The equestrians were shaken after watching their ally fall. "This is for Anton." An equestrian shouted as he and another equestrian charged at Fester. "You idiot. What are you provoking them for?" said Zeno. Provocation. Zeno's arrows kept the equestrians at bay while Kasim used the provocation, a martial skill that forcibly directed an enemy's hostility to himself. "These guys are stronger than we heard they would be," the unit's vice-captain whispered to himself. Kasim and his party were strong. The 3 of them were E-class adventurers, but they already had abilities worthy of D-class. In terms of ability, they were more than a match for the equestrians. With Vandali's enchantments added to their equipment, they had become threats that couldn't be taken lightly, even 10 against 3, to the point that the vice-captain now feared that they would all be individually defeated as a result of having split up to aim for the villagers. What's taking Captain Karkan so long? The equestrians were supposed to have charged through both the front and back gates, cause chaos and crush every adventurer and villager that tried to resist, but at this rate, even if they weren't defeated, they would suffer heavy losses. Thinking that it would be bad if more casualties were suffered, the vice-captain of the unit turned to give orders to the agitated equestrians. "I'll deal with the swordsman." 2 of you keep the shield bearer busy and the rest of you take care of the archer," he shouted, riding his horse towards Festa. As someone with the job and social position of a true knight like Karkan, he possessed greater abilities than Festa. He wouldn't be defeated easily if he utilized his advantage of being on horseback, even with the enchantments on Festa's equipment. "Cheat. Zeno, try to run around," Festa shouted as he moved to engage the vice-captain. And then he felt something flying over his head at incredible speed. The head of the enemy he was trying to engage vanished with the sound of a bursting fruit. Festa and the equestrians let out foolish-sounding noises of surprise. Not noticing that its master's head had exploded, the vice-captain's horse continued running right past Festa. The long sword dropped from the vice-captain's shaking hand. "I almost hit the horse. It's hard to aim this telekinesis rifle, even though it could be useful because I don't have to worry about the bullets exploding since they're made of liquid death iron. I suppose it's no use without a gun barrel," said a voice from overhead. Everyone looked up to see Vandali floating there, surrounded by several black, fist-sized spheres floating around him. "Well then, I'll go for the remaining ones the normal way." Before the very eyes of the equestrians, who still hadn't recovered from their astonishment, numerous black spears of flames appeared around Vandali. "Wait, black flame spear?" Starting with the one who looked like he was about to surrender, Vandali released his magic at all of the equestrians, one by one. "Hang on, oi! Weren't they trying to surrender?" Kasim shouted. "Sorry, I couldn't stop myself in time," said Vandali. He had lied so many times now that he was starting to feel bad, but there was no helping it. "I see well, I suppose it was just my imagination." They were still holding their weapons, after all, said Kasim, having lost interest in the equestrians who were now corpses. From his perspective, the equestrians were simply bandits, so he hadn't had any intention of criticizing Vandali for killing them mercilessly to begin with. It seemed that he had simply shouted out in surprise. "You saved us. If you were any later, things could have gone badly. It's the second time you've saved us now," he said. "Is this all of them?" asked Zeno. "Well then, we need to clean up the corpses and gather the horses inside to make sure they don't run away." "Blag. Festa, you go and explain what's happened to the village chief," said Zeno. "Leave it to be," said Festa, struggling to speak. "There is one bandit who escaped, so I am going to chase after him," said Vandali. "Are you all right on your own?" "I think you are, but do you want help with anything?" asked Kasim. "It's fine. Rather than help me, I will ask you to take care of things here." "All right." Kasim watched Vandali fly off and then grimaced as he realized that he had to pick up the broken fragments of the enemy's heads that Vandali had smashed to pieces. "I should have asked him to just burn them all," he muttered to himself. Karkake, terrified at the fact that his body refused to move, as if it was now made of stone, Froto looked in despair at the countless compound eyes that were gazing at him. Rank 3 paralyzing moths that scattered scales with paralyzing venom from their wings. Rank 2 carrion flies that used their acidic saliva to dissolve weakened creatures as they consumed them. Rank 3 clear dragon butterflies, which could turn transparent for short periods of time. Rank 4 chameleon mantises, the assassins of the forests. And then there were the rank 5 cemetery bees that had poisonous stingers and jaws that could destroy metal armor as if they were decorative pieces of candy, as well as a rank 4 lance centipede with horns and a carapace tougher than iron. To Froto, the sounds of their jaws and wings sounded like the countdown to his death. He was an outstanding mage, but since he was fundamentally a researcher, he had little experience in real battles. Karkan had brought him not for his ability in battle, but because he knew all of the villagers' faces. Even so, he might have been able to manage to repel the small number of monsters present except for the cemetery bees and the lance centipede. If there was only one type of venom to deal with, he might have been able to counteract it. But even though the monsters were all insectoids, Froto didn't have the strength to fight against over a dozen monsters of different races, nor did he have the ability to counteract multiple types of venom. This cannot be. Someone, please save me. I'm not the kind of person that can be allowed to die in a place like this. My death would be an immeasurable loss for this nation. His eyeballs, the only moving part of his body, searched for help, but there were no signs that any help would come. Karkan, Froto's superior, had been killed right at the beginning, and his subordinates had quickly shared the same fate. Froto had the feeling that the spy had been among them. Considering that, it was likely that all of the other equestrians had been slaughtered by Vandali as well. Even if there were survivors, they weren't close enough to Froto to come and save him, and even if they did come, It was difficult to imagine that they would be able to defeat these monsters. Just as Froto gave up hope, a crimson and purple eye appeared from behind the insectoid monsters. "It's been a while," said Vandali. He had killed Karkan and his men in a flash, and now he was looking down at Froto. There was no emotion in his voice or on his face. Unable to speak, Froto screamed internally. "I've heard the gist of the story from the spirit of the man named Karkan," Vandali continued, extending his hand towards Froto. "You were a hired mage who infiltrated the cultivation villages in order to destroy them, not a priest. Your objective was to gain a better position for yourself, it seems." "He knows everything? He was a spiritualist as well?" Froto felt surprise and fear, and cursed Karkan in his mind for selling him out so quickly after dying and becoming a spirit. "Wait," I stopped. "I knew this attack was pointless, but Karkan forced me into it. Before this attack, several of the other cultivation villages were supposed to have been destroyed by plans that Froto had put in place himself, and he had conveniently forgotten this. But his tongue, paralyzed by the venom, was unable to produce any words. "It seems that you have something to say, but there is nothing I want to hear from you," said Vandali. "But you really have done something troublesome." He had repelled bandits to protect the village. There would be no problem with that. But the fact that the bandits were actually knights was a problem. Normally, Karkan and his men would have been treated as a shame to all knights. But there was the fact that the cultivation project to alleviate the refugee problem was actually a plan to leave the people to fend for themselves, and the fact that Karkan had been acting according to Lucas's will, even if he had been making decisions mostly independently towards the end. Thus, it didn't seem that things would end so simply. It seemed that they had come out on the pretense of going on an expedition, but it was certain that the people of the Knights Order would realize that the missing Karkan and his men were the bandits who had been massacred in the cultivation villages. When that happened, what would they do? It would be convenient for Vandali and the cultivation villages if they didn't make a move. If the Knights Order and the noblemen acted as if nothing had happened and treated the death of Karkan and his men as them having gone missing during their expedition, then nothing would happen. However, considering what had happened up until now, Vandali had no faith in the Hartner family or the noble families close to the Hartner family. They would definitely try something. If I knew they were knights before I killed them, I could have taken them alive and possibly tried various things to cover it up, but your disguises were too elaborate, said Vandali. To actually die so quickly like real bandits, how I suppose going as far as to say that would be unreasonable. Vandali's hand drew steadily closer to Froto. Froto was waiting in suspense, wondering when black flames would appear from that hand, when claws would extend from its fingers. But that didn't happen. Vandali's hand lifted Froto's face up. Froto wondered whether he was being spared. Thank you, truly, thank you. I'll tell you everything I know, and I'll do anything for your sake. So spare. Insects silently emerged from Vandali's cold hand that was touching Froto's cheek. Just as Froto saw the eyeless heads of numerous colorful, venomous-looking worms coming out of Vandali's hand, their long bodies began twisting and crawling over his face. They're beautiful, aren't they? Said Vandali. These are creatures that live as parasites in the bodies of other creatures. They can infest all kinds of places, like the brain or other internal organs. I'll tell you now that your consciousness will not be taken over. You will feel the pain and everything else vividly. The slimy parasite creatures began entering Froto's body through his mouth, nose and ears. He let out stifled screams. Watching him tremble and convulse ominously, Vandali made a confession. I'll say this now because perhaps you haven't noticed. I am very angry. Vandali felt anger and disappointment at Froto's betrayal. He had admired Froto and thought he was a good person for a believer of Elder. But he had betrayed Vandali like this. Vandali wanted to erase the past where he had worried for Froto's safety. Well, as you were a spy to begin with, I'm sure you thought that I was a fool for not noticing, Vandali continued. Your eyes are telling me that I was a fool to be deceived, too. I'm not thinking anything like that. The voice of Froto, who was still alive, couldn't be heard by Vandali. Vandali waited for the parasites to finish infesting Froto and then grabbed his body. And then Froto's body silently began entering Vandali's hand. What will happen to me? Someone save me! With his screams unheard by anyone, Froto disappeared inside Vandali. This is an underhanded trick, but I can equip creatures infested by parasitic insects with insect binding technique, Vandali explained. In order to use dungeons to transport the ghouls who had been living in the devil's nests of the Hartner Duchy and the livestock he had received in trade with the farming villages, Vandali had made parasites infest them, equipped them inside his body and then teleported to Talersheim. Of course, he had only used a single harmless parasite for each person, only having them infested just before teleporting and then quickly releasing them straight after arriving in Talersheim. If Vandali transported Froto to Talersheim alive and disposed of him there, his corpse wouldn't be found by the villagers, nor would there be even a sliver of a chance for him appearing near the village if he turned into a ghost. Death attribute charm wasn't flawless, so Vandali was sure to take precautions where he could. But perhaps because his capacity had decreased after equipping Froto, he was now one insect short of equipping all of them. I suppose unexpected, troublesome situations like this arise if I equip so many insects close to my limit, Vandali murmured. Click click click. Pete seemed to be asking what they would do. Now that his rank had increased and he had become a lance centipede, he was now larger than an anaconda. Well, the gatekeepers already saw you, so I'm sure it will be fine. Vandali might be scolded a little, but it would probably be fine for him to bring Pete with him. Once the bandits are all disposed of, I have to set some lemurs around Nirki and Nineland. Then I have to release some undead insects and, Vandali's words trailed off as he let out a sigh. The villagers of the 7th cultivation village were shocked by the bandit attack and praised Vandali and Kasim's party for defending them. It was still morning, so there wasn't a feast thrown to celebrate. They stripped the bandits of their equipment, had Vandali burn the corpses and bury the ashes so that they wouldn't rise as undead, and gathered all of the horses. Then it was noon and the celebrations began. "Don't go screaming my name like that," said Lena. "But I was desperate to protect you," Festa told her. "So I'm telling you, don't go shouting that to everyone. Say it when we're alone together." Festa seemed to have recovered from the mental shock of having killed someone for the first time, and his relationship with Lena was moving forward as well. Apparently, a couple consisting of an Adventurers Guild employee and an active adventurer couldn't get married until one of them retired, so their goal was still far off, however. "I don't really get it," said Kasim. "But I did know that he's like Lena for a while." "More than not really getting it, it's just lonely," said Zeno. "Being single, that is. Did you know that Morris went and got engaged at that age, apparently? Yeah, with his childhood friend. I wonder how you get a girlfriend." Kasim and Zeno were both staring into the distance. "That reminds me, Braga and his single companions were saying the same thing until this spring," thought Vandali. "Vandali, you probably don't understand at your age. But make sure you get along with girls," Kasim told him. "I'll do that." This was the only response Vandali could give, as he imagined how they would complain if they learned of his circumstances. Also, he was staying silent about Froto, who was currently convulsing inside Vandali's body. After that, Lena, as an employee of the village's branch of the Adventurers Guild, reported that 20 bandits had been repelled and paid Kasim's party the reward. The villagers didn't even know about the existence of the other 30 that had been defeated by the golems. The horses that Karkan and his men had been riding were now all Vandali's. He was the one who had defeated most of the bandits, after all, so the rewards went to Kasim and Vandali got the horses. But Vandali had no use for the horses, so he divided them among the cultivation villages. They would live new lives as farming horses. "I'm currently still just a civilian, so if I receive money, it would count as doing business and I would have to pay taxes. So please just pay however much you want to the adventurers," Vandali told the people of the other villages. "Are you sure about that? We don't really have anything we can offer you as a collateral." "It's fine. I'm leaving all of the responsibilities of taking care of the horses to you, after all. And besides, if Vandali brought living horses back, Sam would be upset." Vandali had accidentally been given a farming horse when he was collecting livestock from this region's villages. This was the conversation that had taken place when he brought that horse back to Talersheim. "Botchan. You have me, and yet you would use a living horse as your legs. Sam, you don't have to say it like you're reprimanding your husband for having an affair." It seemed that Sam felt threatened by the fact that Vandali could spend long hours flying through the sky and had now even gained the ability to teleport between dungeons. "Maybe I should register at the Commerce Guild as a horse leasing business." This idea suddenly occurred to Vandali, but where he had obtained the horses would be problematic to explain, so it was probably best to see how things went for a while. After that, having prepared themselves mentally during the fight against the bandits, Kasim's party apparently managed to get through their D-class promotion exam that they took at the city of Nirki. At that point in time, nothing had happened yet. The levels of the insect binding technique, coordination, strength and subordinates, strength and followers, death attribute charm and throwing skills have increased. You have acquired the thread refining skill. Shortly after the new year, Lord Lucas looked at his completely petrified subordinate, feeling no desire to bring his mouth to the mulled wine that had been poured into his cup. Lord Lucas's office poured into his cup. Lord Lucas's office preserved the heat well, but his subordinate looked as if even his innards had frozen solid. His face and shoulders were completely stiff. Perhaps it was not Lord Lucas that needed the hot wine, but this subordinate. However, it was not warmth, but a business-like question that Lord Lucas gave. So, where is Kakan Lassen and his unit? The subordinate's face stiffened even further. The problem was that the knight named Kakan Lassen, who had planned to go on a 2-week expedition, as well as his entire unit, had gone missing. To Lord Lucas himself, Kakan's name and face were things that he could barely recall from the corner of his mind. Kakan was the man in charge of one of the background operations conducted in Lord Lucas's dispute with his younger brother Belton over the succession of the Hartner family. Kakan was a man from the Lassen family, who had served as knights for the Hartner family for generations. In other words, he was a man from a family who had never risen above the mere status of knights despite having been around for generations, a very ordinary knight. Of course, there was nothing wrong with being a mere knight. They had the splendid duty of protecting the land from monsters, criminals and enemy nations, as well as acting as role models for the soldiers and the people. However, Kakan had desired a position above his own ability. The petrified subordinate before Lord Lucas, the captain of the Red Wolf Knights Order, Pablo Martin, had noticed him and entrusted him with one of Lord Lucas's plans. That is, there has been no contact despite the expedition's planned duration having already passed, and when we sent people to investigate, it was found that they were not at the expedition's destination. Also, the Adventurers Guild apparently received a report that a cultivation village was attacked by about 20 bandits on horseback, but the bandits were repelled safely. Hearing Pablo's response, Lord Lucas felt dizzy despite not having drank any of the wine. "I see," he said. "That cultivation village was attacked by 20 wealthy bandits with horses, but they repelled them successfully. That small village? Pablo, is there any chance that there were 50 of those bandits, not 20? No, according to the Adventurers Guild's records, there were 20. However, I am thinking the same thing," said Pablo. In other words, it was likely that Kakan had led his unit out of the city, pretending to go on an expedition, then attacked the cultivation village disguised as bandits, where they were defeated. A small cultivation village had annihilated a unit of 3 true knights and 50 equestrians. Even considering that they had lowered the quality of their equipment in order to disguise themselves as bandits, it was difficult to believe. However, numerous unbelievable events had occurred in the Hartner Duchy last year. Both the actions Kakan had taken and the fate that he had met were nothing more than more of these unbelievable events. I believe I ordered him not to lay a hand on the cultivation villages. No, I believe I ordered the cancellation of every secret plan after Belton's scandal, did I not? Said Lord Lucas. Lord Lucas had ordered all of his secret plans to be cancelled, knowing that it was no longer the time for him and Lord Belton to be pulling at each other's feet. Belton himself was apparently innocent, but the fact that several influential noblemen had connections to the pure-breed vampires caused an unbelievable scandal. If this wasn't dealt with correctly, it wasn't a matter of the Hartner family losing the trust of the other Duke families. It was more than possible that many would demand that the Hartner family's status as a family of dukes be revoked. No, before that, perhaps rebellions would begin occurring all over the duchy. It was a critical moment that could have spelled the end of the Hartner family if Lord Lucas and Lord Belton had continued dragging each other down, which was why Lord Lucas had ordered all secret plans to be cancelled. But why had Kakan made a move? That is, it seems that he was desperate for success, said Pablo. I see. With people like this selected to work for us, I suppose it cannot be helped that things turned out this way. Lord Lucas sighed as he thought about how to deal with this problem. It would not be good to treat all of them as having gone missing in an accident during their expedition. It wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be a big problem, either. The equestrians led by Kakan were apprentices of knights. There were the second and third sons of noble families among them as well. Of course, their families were those that supported Lord Lucas. Naturally, they knew of the conflict between the brothers. That was why they would probably not be satisfied with the explanation that they had simply gone missing. Although it would cause some displeasure, it would be possible to silence them by brandishing the power of the nation. However, the problem was that there was something ominous going on in this cultivation village. What do you think of the people in this cultivation village? Lord Lucas asked. Most likely they are threatening us, perhaps, said Pablo. My thoughts exactly, said Lord Lucas. The Adventurers Guild had received news that it was 20, not 50 bandits. Lord Lucas interpreted this as the cultivation village declaring to him, you know that we're keeping quiet about this for you, don't you? In fact, a scandal at a time like this would be bad. Normally, scandals would be dealt with one way or another, but the king and the other dukes were currently scrutinizing the Hartner duchy. There was no telling what kind of faults they would find with the Hartner family. That was why knowing the truth behind the incident was more than enough for the cultivation village to blackmail him. Thus, Lord Lucas thought that the villagers and adventurers from the village somehow managed to kill Karkan and his men in retaliation. If Lord Lucas and Pablo had received a detailed report on Vandali, they would have come to a different conclusion. However, until the moment of his death, Karkan had believed that Vandali was someone who could be dealt with by his unit alone, so he hadn't provided much detail in his reports out of fear that his ability would be doubted. Perhaps Knights of the Sauron Duchy were among the refugees, Pablo suggested. It could even be that they are planning to establish their own independent power. There are no devil's nests around there, and that incident occurred in that slave-run mine, so not many will approach those villagers from now on. Lord Lucas sighed as he listened to Pablo's words, realizing that he couldn't just leave the cultivation village alone after all. He had treated the refugees cruelly and tried to turn them into disposable, low-grade soldiers, and he had even intended to use secret plans to destroy several of the other cultivation villages. Thus, he was now unconsciously thinking of this village as an enemy that would harm him if given the opportunity. And he couldn't leave these people from the Sauron Duchy alone when they possessed an unknown amount of military might and political power in the Hartner Duchy that he would soon be in charge of. Pablo, this is your responsibility, said Lord Lucas. Use the Red Wolf Knight's order to deal with this. Chapter 92, The Troops led by a herbivorous man versus the Red Wolf Knight's order. Vandali has reached level 100 in Insect User. You have job changed to Treecaster. You have acquired the plant binding technique skill. The farming skill has been combined with the plant binding technique skill. The levels of the rapid healing, superhuman strength, plant binding technique and thread refining skills have increased. Name, Vandali. Race, Damper, Dark Elf. Age, 7 years old. Title: Ghoul King, Eclipse King, Second Coming of the Demon King, Guardian of the Cultivation Villages, Holy Son of Veda, Taboo. Name: Job, Treecaster. Level, 0. Job history: Death attribute Mage, Golem Transmuter, Undead Tamer, Soulbreaker, Venom Fist User, Insect User. Attributes: Vitality, 644 Mana, 446,023,946 Strength, 239 Agility, 273 Stamina, 374 Intelligence, 903. Passive skills: Superhuman Strength, Level 5, Level Up, Rapid Healing, Level 7, Level Up, Death Attribute Magic, Level 7 Status Effect Resistance, Level 7 Magic Resistance, Level 4 Dark Vision Death Attribute Charm, Level 9, Level Up, Chant Revocation, Level 4 Strengthen Followers, Level 10, Level Up, Automatic Mana Recovery, Level 6 Strengthen Subordinates, Level 5, Level Up, Venom Secretion, Claws, Fangs, Tongue, Level 4 Enhanced Agility, Level 2 Body Expansion, Tongue, Level 4 Strengthened Attack Power while unarmed, Small Enhanced Physical Ability, Hair, Claws, Tongue, Fangs, Level 3, Level Up, Thread Refining, Level 2, New. Active Skills: Bloodwork, Level 2 Surpass Limits, Level 6 Golem Transmutation, Level 7 No Attribute Magic, Level 5 Mana Control, Level 5 Spirit Form, Level 7 Carpentry, Level 6, Level Up, Engineering, Level 4 Cooking, Level 5, Level Up, Alchemy, Level 4 Unarmed Fighting Technique, Level 5 Soul Break, Level 6 Multicast, Level 5 Long Distance Control, Level 7 Surgery, Level 3 Parallel Thought Processing, Level 5 Materialization, Level 4 Coordination, Level 4, Level Up, High Speed Thought Processing, Level 3 Commanding, Level 3, Level Up, Farming, Level 3 Plant Binding Technique, Level 3, Combined, Clothing, Level 2 Thread Reeling, Level 3, Combined, Throwing, Level 4, Level Up, Scream, Level 3 Dead Spirit Magic, Level 3, Level Up, Insect Binding Technique, Level 3, Level Up, Blacksmithing, Level 1, New. Unique skills. God Slayer, Level 4 Grotesque Mind, Level 4 Mental Encroachment, Level 4, Level Up, Labyrinth Construction, Level 5, Level Up. Curses. Experience gained in previous life not carried over, cannot learn existing jobs, unable to gain experience independently. There were no new jobs this time. A short while after finishing his job change, Vandali returned from the immortal forest. "Mom, everyone, I've become a plant-binding type man," Vandali announced. "Really? That's amazing, Vandali," said Darsa, praising Vandali no matter what he did despite not understanding his joke. "No, wait, Van. What does herbivorous mean?" asked Basdia, giving him a perplexed look. "They're a type of person that was growing in number in the world I used to live in," Vandali replied. Considering those called herbivorous men on Earth, Vandali was more of a carnivorous man, however. "Actually, with the plant-binding technique skill I gained after my job change, I've been able to do things like this," said Vandali. And then a monster plant popped out of his head. "I see, so it is a plant version of the insect binding skill," said Zadaris, commenting on the skill while ignoring Vandali's joke. "But will the insects and plants not consume each other? That never happened in the monster plant fields or the immortal int forest, so I wouldn't think so," said Vandali. "I see." Another plant's roots appeared right before Zadaris's eyes. "Boy, this appears to be a very ordinary plant," she said. "Yes, it is a very ordinary plant," said Vandali. "My farming skill combined with the plant-binding technique skill, so I've become able to cultivate plants inside my body as a result." "Are they not acting as parasites to you?" Zadaris asked. Look, Anisan, Botchan's head is full of flowers," Ritu exclaimed. "Rita. If you say it that way, it makes it sound like Botchan is a useless person, doesn't it?" Saria exclaimed indignantly. "There are other ways to say it, aren't there? Like saying that it's wonderful and spring-like." You too, I know that you don't mean anything bad, but I think there's another way to say it, isn't there?" said Darsa. It seemed that the phrases head full of flowers and spring-like didn't have particularly good meanings in Lambda, either. "It's fine," said Vandali. "They just use up a little of my vitality. Vandali-sama, unlike your mana, your vitality isn't very high, is it? You must be careful with it and not be wasteful with it," said Eleonora, as if teaching him how to use his pocket money. "Okay," said Vandali. "But I'm raising plants that have medicinal compounds, so there's no need to worry. For example, a white mushroom sprouted from Vandali's head. If I'm not mistaken, that's a mushroom that can be used for potions, isn't it?" said Kuka. "If I recall, it has healing properties even if you eat it as it is, but it looks more and more like they're parasitizing you." It was a convenient mushroom, but it didn't seem to be very popular with Kuka and the others. "This is training for my skill as well, so go ahead and take some," said Vandali, offering the mushroom to everyone as a present. He produced more mushrooms from his head, plucked them, cut them into even pieces with his claws, used his thread-refining skill to produce thread from his mouth and bundled the mushroom pieces together. Incidentally, he had recently become able to produce thread from his mouth, or, more accurately, from the tip of his tongue and his fingertips. Perhaps for this reason, his thread-reeling skill included the sewing skill. He could make fabrics more freely than before, so it was very convenient. Vandali could also quite freely control the properties of the thread produced by thread refining, so he was planning to use it to make swimsuits. He could produce threads with adhesive properties, threads that could cut flesh and bone on contact, or transparent thread, but for now, he was using it to make clothing. "Wow, thank you," said Rita. She, Kuka and Eleonora, the ones who used to be humans, were happy with the mushrooms. "Does this have some medicinal effects?" asked Zadaris. "These aren't very tasty," said Basdia. The pure ghouls, perhaps because they had no custom of giving flowers as gifts, seemed perplexed. Munch, munch, munch. Rapisage was eating them. Porvina and Jiddle saw her and ate them as well. "Ugh, they're so bitter," said Porvina. It seemed that her memories of human society were somewhere very far away now. Vandali produced sweet fruit for Porvina and Jiddle to eat. Darsa seemed to have entered parenting mode. "Vandali, I'm happy, but when you're giving presents to girls, you need to think about what they would like," she said. "Yes, Mom," said Vandali. "You can't think of it as too troublesome," Darsa continued. "Your father used to say that thinking about things like this was the enjoyable part of courting girls." "Mom, what kind of things was Dad doing?" Vandali asked. "If I recall, he was apparently seducing girls in bars in order to gather information. Getting along well with the prostitutes, things like that. Come to think of it, you're the same, Vandali." Darsa smiled as her words gave glimpses the wrongdoings of Valen, Vandali's father. As to be expected of the former dog of a pure-breed vampire. "Well, I gave dresses and tuxedos to Braga and the other black goblins for their weddings, and I baked them cakes as well," said Vandali. Wedding parties were only held for the wealthy people of Lambda, but one had been thrown for the wedding ceremonies of the black goblins. This was the debut of the wedding dresses and tuxedos made of honey silk, as well as a cake decorated with cream made from goat milk. Everyone had loved it. The dresses were particularly popular with the people from the first cultivation village. Many of them had sparkling eyes and said they wanted to wear them as well. Even for the ghouls, whose fashion sense was quite different from that of humans, the frills and laces were fresh ideas. They gave their opinions to Vandali, telling him that they were beautiful, though they did wish that they revealed more skin. "Kid, make one for this girl as well," Borkus requested. "You foolish Oyaji. I don't have anyone to marry," Gopher told him. "Then a tuxedo for my grandson? He doesn't have someone to marry, either." This was the exchange between Borkus and Gopher, a father and his daughter, who were also communicating physically with dull sounds of them hitting each other. Doing as he was told, Vandali had tried to measure Gopher's size, only to be rejected. But he and everyone else interpreted that as embarrassment. A grown woman would certainly feel reluctant to wear a dress with all kinds of frills and laces. When Vandali had made them for Marie and the other wives of the Black Goblins, things had gone better than he had expected, so he got carried away and perhaps added too many. The cake had cream and butter made from goat's milk, which had a problematic smell, but it was well received by everyone. According to a documentary on goat farming that Vandali had seen on Earth, he remembered that goat's milk simply absorbed smells from its surroundings easily, so it would not smell bad if machines were used to squeeze it from the goats quickly. With this in mind, he had thought of squeezing the milk from the goats in a sterilized room while continuously casting deodorization, so the goat's milk didn't smell. In fact, he had added large quantities of a sweet flavoring made from vanilla beans that he had found in the Eclipse King's orchard. Dessert was covered by the cemetery bees' honey and sugar created from a plant-type monster from the Eclipse King's orchard that offered a maple syrup-like sap. Perhaps it was a far more luxurious cake than one made from normal cow milk and sugar. "Ah, but you mustn't lose your mind over women. Your father used to say that you shouldn't fall for women, but make them fall for you," said Darsa. "Well, he did fall for me properly, though. I wish Dad would have acted more normally and said more normal things," said Vandali. It was probably a good story. Probably, although Vandali's internal image of his father had now tilted in a strange direction and sunk a little. "Well, leaving that aside, I'm going to the 7th cultivation village tomorrow, so I'm going to make preparations now. I have to make use of the opportunity they created for me," said Vandali. "You are going to welcome more new citizens to Talersheim, aren't you?" "This is truly auspicious, Your Majesty," said Princess Livia with a gentle smile. As snow started falling, the ordinary lifestyles of the villagers, who were eating fried gobu-gobu for breakfast, were broken by the sudden visit of the Knight's Order. "I am Pablo Martin, the man who leads the Red Wolf Knight's Order in the name of Duke Hartner," a voice shouted. "Inhabitants of the 7th cultivation village, come out at once." The Red Wolf Knight's Order was one of the 3 great Knights' Orders that protected the Hartner Duchy. The village chief, the Oyaji of the Jack-of-all-trades store, and Kasim's party all hastily ran outside to see what was happening. In the plaza, there were the young men who had been acting as the village's gatekeepers, who were now cowering, as well as a large number of fully armed knights. Dozens of knights with metal armor under their surcoats, armed with shields, long swords and spears, nearly 100 of them. The villagers were overwhelmed by their presence. "We humbly welcome you in this snowy season. We apologize for not being able to come out and greet you." "What business did you have on this day?" asked the village chief, surprised and wondering what on earth this was about. "I have come to collect taxes in the name of Lord Lucas, the next Duke of the Hartner Duchy. Each person must offer 100,000 bombs, right this instant." Pablo demanded, a nervous look on his face. The villagers were shocked by the amount he was requesting. 100,000 bombs? There is no way we would have such an amount. "And what do you mean, right this instant? We were promised that we would be exempt from taxes for 5 years. 100,000 bombs was an amount of money that even many noble families didn't have." Of course, it was certainly an amount that the people of the cultivation village couldn't make even if they worked frantically for an entire year. Even Kasim and his party, who had become D-class adventurers, couldn't earn this much in a year. Such a tax was being demanded not of each household, but each individual. It was absurd. What are you thinking? Even if we sell our houses and fields, it's impossible. You know that much, right? Fester shouted. The nervous-looking Pablo opened his mouth to reply. The 5-year exemption from taxes that Lord Belton established has been invalidated, he said. Those who couldn't pay poll taxes were taken away as debt slaves. Seeing the knights' attendants preparing ropes behind Pablo, the faces of the villagers grew pale. Even though debt slaves were treated reasonably well, there was no difference in the fact that they were bought and sold between owners. Families would be torn apart and, depending on the owner, they could meet fates worse than death. And if they were not sold, they would be treated like criminal slaves and sent to places where they would be worked to death. The slave-run mine was no more, but there were other final destinations for unsold slaves. That is nothing more than tyranny. Lena cried. That's right, that's right. Even Elder teaches that you should watch your limits. Kasim shouted. Everyone grew angry, but Pablo and his men responded by drawing their swords and pointing them at the villagers. Your name was Lena, wasn't it? You have been charged with embezzlement and fraud. Pablo declared. Until the investigation is completed, your qualification as an Adventurers Guild employee is void. There is also a suspicion that the 3 adventurers known as Kasim, Zeno and Fester are accomplices in the guild employees' fraud. Your qualifications as adventurers are void as well. We have permission to deliver your punishment on the spot if you make any attempt to escape. No way. Lena cried, almost screaming. Fraud? There's a limit to how far you can go with false accusations. Fester shouted in rage. Calm down. They'll cut us down on the spot, said Kasim, trying to calm them down. A middle-aged man protected by a knight on either side approached them. Hand over your employee badge and your guild cards. The administrative official accompanying the knight's order confiscated the identification items of the distraught Lena and frustrated adventurers. Pablo seemed nervous again as he looked at the villagers, who were now wearing expressions of resignation. This is strange, things are going too well. Lucas had expected Pablo to force the village to reveal its hidden military force after being cornered for these absurd reasons. The Red Wolf Knight's order had gained total control over the people, and that was the end of it. Lucas had expected the behind-the-scenes negotiation with the Adventurers Guild to be the one thing that would take time, but the Guild Master of the Adventurers Guild headquarters, who had been taking bribes from Lord Belton, quickly changed to Lord Lucas's side. However, there were no signs of any armed forces, despite Pablo and his men having thought that the ones who had killed Kakan and his men would be hiding in this village. At this rate, things will end with the villagers all being tied up and dragged off. Is this not enough provocation? Maybe I should cut some people down. No, perhaps they're hiding in another cultivation village. I suppose getting that information out of them comes first, thought Pablo. Some villagers were hanging their heads in defeat, thinking that they had no choice but to obediently become slaves, while others were desperately trying to think of a way out of the situation, but they couldn't come up with any answers. But before anything happened, a group of several people, who had calmly walked through the unmanned gate, appeared. Who are you people? Pablo had thought that the armed forces had finally arrived, but these people were what looked like 5 ordinary villagers. It was only after his question that he realized that the one standing at the front was a child who was less than 10 years old. Vandali? What are you doing here at a time like this? Oi, that guy isn't a villager. He's just a passerby. After noticing Vandali, Kasim and his friends hastily raised their voices so that he wouldn't get caught up in this mess. But it was one of the people behind Vandali who responded to their words. Everyone of the 7th cultivation village, do you remember me? Ask this person. Village Chief San, my father has always been in your care. Kasim, Zeno, Fester, I've talked to you before as well, haven't I? The villagers opened their eyes wide in shock at the sight of this young man, whose face had ordinary features that could be found anywhere. You're the son of the 1st cultivation village's chief, Sabaz. You're Sabaz. There's no doubt about it, that's Sabaz. But why is he here? After the 1st cultivation village was deserted, they were supposed to have gone to another land for cultivation. Why are you with Vandali? The young man's name was Sabaz. He was the son of the 1st cultivation's village chief. He had joined Vandali at the slave-run mine and become a citizen of Taylorsheim. Everyone, listen to me. The cultivation project is a complete lie. Everything is a conspiracy conducted by the Hartner family. We've been cheated. Nobody from the first cultivation village was sent to another land for cultivation. We were sent to the slave-run mine to the south. We're not cultivators, we've been abandoned," he said to the villagers of the 7th cultivation village, pointing at Pablo with a hateful expression on his face. The villagers were astounded and looked from Subas to Pablo. Subas was a friend that they knew. Pablo and his men, on the other hand, while seemingly being important knights, were making unreasonable demands and trying to turn the villagers into slaves. It was clear as to which story should be listened to. "You're the son of the chief of the first cultivation village, and you were in the slave-run mine?" Pablo repeated. He and his men weren't trusted by the villagers, but this wasn't a problem at all. The problem was that a young man, who was in the slave-run mine where all of the soldiers and slaves were supposed to have turned into skeletons, was standing here. "In other words, you are a runaway slave. I shall hear your explanation later. Give up quietly." With Pablo's words, swords and spears were pointed at Subas. It seemed that they had already realized that this was no group of ordinary people. The knights formed a semicircular surround as they closed in. Seeing this, the villagers were wearing expressions of resignation once more. Even if there was a conspiracy or whatever else, there was no changing their fates. This was something planned by the man who was about to become the most powerful person in the Hartner Duchy, and even the Adventurers Guild had a hand in it. Complaints from people like them, who were refugees from another land, were futile. At this rate, even bringing up the fact that the Church of Aldo was exempt from tax would be pointless. "Everyone, please listen to me," said Vandali, who had remained silent up until now. "We will defeat these knights. Completely independent of the desires of the people of this village, I will fight them and defeat them." Hearing the young boy's flat-toned declaration, the knights snickered. They knew that they couldn't judge an enemy's ability by their appearance and age, but there was no way that they could be defeated by this small, thin boy who could almost be called a toddler and a group of unarmed villagers. That was what they thought. The people of the 7th cultivation village seemed to agree. They all shouted at Vandali to stop his reckless behavior, but he ignored them and kept speaking. "After I do this, please decide whether you will follow us back or not." "Now then." "No, I'll decide now. I'm going with you guys," said a voice, interrupting Vandali. It was Festa's voice. He got back onto his feet from his kneeling position, picked up the sword that he had cast onto the ground along with its sheath, and pointed its tip at Pablo and his men. Rather than stopping him, Cass picked up his shield and Zeno picked up his weapon as they got to their feet as well. "There's no helping it. I suppose we'll join you," said Cassim. "Well, I suppose it's better than becoming a slave," said Zeno. Festa blinked in confusion at the fact that his companions weren't stopping him, and then gave them a manly smile. "Sorry for making you accompany me all the time," he said. "No, wait a second," Vandali said hastily. "Why are you doing this? You don't have to decide now, you can decide afterwards." He thought that they should make a decision afterwards, but their minds were set. Vandali. "After this, let's go on adventures together in the next world," said Festa. "No, no, no, we can do that in this world," said Vandali. Festa turned to Lena. "Lena, try to find an opportunity to run." "Sorry about this. Even though I promised to make you happy." "Festa, no, I'll come with you," said Lena. "I at least know how to defend myself. And then let's be together on the other side." Festa looked touched. If you're going to be together, won't you be together here?" said Vandali. "I'll make you a dress, a tuxedo, a cake or even curry. Cheat. I can't let my daughter and my son-in-law die before me. I'm going to do this too," shouted the Oyaji of the Jack-of-all-trades store. "Me too. Even if we're spared here, I have no idea what will become of my children. You saved my life before, so I'll use it for your sake now," said the former stonemason Ivan, whose life Vandali had saved before. The villagers continued standing up one after another, and even the Red Wolf Knight's order felt a little flustered. But the one panicking the most was Vandali. "So then, Your Majesty, what will we do?" asked one of the other people with Vandali. There's no other choice," Vandali replied. "I'll support the villagers, and you guys go with the plan." "Certainly. I suppose it was a mistake to think I could do the same thing as I did in the slave-run mine," Vandali said with a sigh. Silence. Pablo roared before gathering his men and giving them orders. "Cut them all down. Capture that one called Sabas and the other few people over there, alive. Things had gone a little differently than he had expected, but he had set his sights on the man who seemed to know something. All there was left to do was to dispose of the others in the way. Upon receiving the orders, the knights who had surrounded Sabers and the others moved first. As knights, they were experienced with real battles, and unlike the equestrians led by Karkan, they were as capable as strong D-class adventurers. They had a solid chance of defeating rank 4 monsters in one-on-one combat. Capture us alive? Go ahead and try. Do you think you feeble knights can defeat us, when we have received the blessing of Eleonora's armor? I'll avenge my siblings who died in the slave-run mine. Sabers and his companions glared at the knights with shining crimson eyes as they bared their fangs and met them in combat. Their movements were faster than those of beasts, their bodies were strong in the face of the knights' swords and spears, and their claws were sharp. These guys aren't human? They're vampires. That's impossible, it's still the middle of the afternoon. By the time the knights realized it, it was too late. They had already allowed Sabers and his companions to draw close. When they were rescued from the slave-run mine, they had still been humans, but the next day, they had asked Eleonora to turn them into subordinate vampires. After that, they acquired the sunlight resistance skill thanks to the effect of Vandali's Eclipse King title, and now they obeyed Vandali. But subordinate vampires had a base rank of 3. These former villages had been vampires for less than half a year. They wouldn't be a match for these numbers who outnumbered them nearly 3 to 1. Even if they caught the knights by surprise, the knights would regain their formation before the vampires would cut through. However, the vampires were citizens of Vandali's nation. They are strong. Due to the influence of strengthened followers and strengthened subordinates, their attribute values had increased and they were as powerful as rank 5 monsters. In addition, Vandali had already applied enchantments to them, and dark copper fibers had been weaved into their clothes, giving them extraordinary defense against bladed weapons. Even if the knights outnumbered the vampires 3 to 1, once their formation was broken, they wouldn't be able to defeat the vampires. Damn it, take that child as a hostage and, one of the knights began. That's impossible for you. The knight's head went flying. Braga, who had been hiding and waiting for things to begin, moved like a shadow and decapitated the knight. With the effect of his unique skill, Human Slayer, he was able to use an attack effective for killing the human he targeted, and even gained a damage bonus. If he took the average knight by surprise, decapitating him was as easy as harvesting an ear of rice. And then he concealed himself like fog before the other knights spotted him. There was something here just now. There are other enemies. Watch your backs. Iron Rend, Embrace of the Flame Spirits. Jaiwa. As the knights watched their backs, Vandali killed them from the front. The knights could not avoid being severely wounded by the frontal attacks of Vandali, who had the superhuman strength, strengthened attack power while unarmed, small, enhanced physical ability, hair, claws, tongue, fangs, as well as a level 5 unarmed fighting technique skill. He had already shown Kasim and the others his dead spirit magic, so he was using that without holding back as well. Some knights were turned into burnt corpses as Princess Livia embraced them, while others had their stomachs slashed open and convulsed on the ground to be finished by pain worms that crawled towards them. Click click click. Buzz buzz buzz. The lance centipede Pete used his horn to pierce a knight's torso straight through his shield, while the cemetery bee's venomous stingers and powerful jaws turned other knights into masses of meat. The villagers were fighting hard as well. The moment the villagers decided that they would follow Vandali, they had been acknowledged as Vandali's citizens. As a result, they received the benefits of strengthened followers due to the Eclipse King title, causing a steep increase in their attribute values. They weren't quite as strong as the knights, but they were at least as strong as ordinary soldiers. If they decided to put everything into escaping, it would have been difficult for the knights, who were equipped with heavy weapons and armor, to give chase. Come on, important knight's armor, over here. How can you be so pathetic for such a young person, you simpleton? The knights chased the villagers who were running around while provoking them. One of the knights stopped to fire an arrow, while another tried to attack with a martial skill. You lowly villagers, die by my curse you, FL. The ground beneath their feet, which had been turned into a golem by Vandali, roared as it rose, causing the knights to fall into the hole it left behind. And then the golem returned to its original position on top of the knights, who had fallen 2 or 3 meters deep. After they were buried alive, Vandali sent monsters resembling earthworms and mole crickets after them, as well as the roots of plant-type monsters, before they suffocated to death so that they could become experience points. How dare you fire my daughter? shouted the Oyaji of the Jack-of-all-trades store. He, Ivan and some others were throwing objects at the administrative official who was accompanying the knights. It was an extremely primitive method of attack, but their physical strength they had trained through daily work on the farms was increased even further by their increased attribute values. The rocks and hoes thrown by them wouldn't be a joke if they made a direct hit. The administrative official gave a pathetic scream. He was nothing more than an ordinary craftsman. Wait, I only did this because it was my job, because I was paid to. If a strong-willed government official had been dispatched, it was possible that he would have sided with the villagers, so this man had been selected after careful consideration. But now that was backfiring. "Q, you coward!" shouted a knight. He and two others were now unable to move, as they were forced to stay where they were to protect this ordinary worker. "Eat this." Triple thrust. Triple thrust. Triple thrust. Stone wall. Stone shield. Cranial strike. Rapid fire. Consecutive fire. In terms of their attribute values, Kasim and his friends, the D-class adventurers, had become as strong as class adventurers. They weren't powerful enough to overwhelm the knights, but they fought with spectacular coordination and had already defeated two of the knights. Please run and lead the knights away while you have their attention. Aim for that administrative official, throw anything you can find at him. Fall back for now and change places with Kasim. These were the orders of Vandali, who had used spirit form transformation and stretched his arms to string-like shapes to connect himself to every villager. Using the vision from lemurs positioned all over the place, Vandali was constantly monitoring the situation. He followed up on the individual dangers detected by danger sense, death, and used rapid healing to treat small injuries. He was even casting his enchantments, energy absorption and bloodshed enhancement, and providing mana to Kasim's party as well as Sibas and the other vampires. Just to be absolutely safe, he was giving the villagers the benefits of his commanding and coordination skills as well, so there were no ordinary villagers in this place anymore. "What is this?" shouted Pablo. Barely a minute after he had given his men orders, they were in the inferior position. In fact, his subordinates were letting out their dying screams one after another as they were scattered. In order to defeat the mysterious armed group that had defeated 50 of Kakan's men, Pablo had brought nearly 100 men with him and each of them was at least as strong as Kakan himself. And yet, they were being slaughtered in a one-sided fashion. The battlefield was an irrational place, but wasn't this a little too irrational? Those who aren't injured, step to the front and use your martial skills. Those who can use healing magic, treat the wounded. Don't engage the villagers, slay the monsters and the adventurers first. Pablo shouted. He was still the captain of the Knights' Order. He had seen that the ones who were defeating the knights were Subas's group, Kasim's party and Vandali, so he was commanding his knights to stop attacking the villagers. As he regained his composure, he looked for the mysterious child who, unbelievably, seemed to be the enemy commander. But as the knights stepped forward to try and use their martial skills, an ant suddenly appeared out of nowhere, or at least, that's what it looked like to Pablo, and attacked by swinging its branches that were full of apple-like fruits. Several knights were hit directly by the fruits and sent flying away. The ones who were trying to recite incantations for healing magic were surrounded in what looked like black fog that seemed to be interfering with their magic. They were unable to cast their spells. And then Pablo heard groaning and viscous sloshing sounds. He could see stone golems, death iron golems and around 30 skeletons who had entered the village from the forest. They were the golems that Vandali had stationed around the 7th cultivation village. He had called them here now. The skeletons were the undead created from the skeletons of Karkan's subordinates who had been slain by the golems. Make your own decisions on how to deal with the enemy. Pablo shouted. He was essentially telling his men that there were no options left, and that he was now relying on every one of his men's individual efforts. And then he joined the battle at the front line as well, in this inferior position with no hope of turning things around. Kasim and the others joining the battle was something that Vandali hadn't expected, but the biggest unexpected thing for Lord Lucas and Pablo was that they were desperately lacking in military power to deal with the problem on their own. Job explanation: Insect user, a job that can be acquired after successfully taming a certain number of insectoid monsters. One must have the trust of the tamed insectoid monsters. This job provides bonuses to vitality, strength and stamina. It also provides bonuses to skills that cannot normally be obtained such as insect binding technique, parallel thought processing, long distance control and thread refining. These are all skills that alter the skill owner's mental state and make it difficult to maintain a normal level of sanity, so the job grants the mental corruption skill and causes a gradual loss of sanity. For those who possess different mental structures from ordinary people and those who have already lost their sanity, this is not a problem. Chapter 93, The Monster Who Won't Give Up. For the people of the 2nd to 6th cultivation villages, this winter day was an unforgettable day indeed. "I have something important to tell everyone," said the savior of the villages. He was accompanied by the people of the 7th cultivation village and those of the 1st cultivation village, which was supposed to have been deserted, as well as several knights in armor who were tied up and being pulled along. "Everyone, listen to me," Subas pleaded. "We've all been deceived by the Hartner family. When we became unable to maintain the 1st cultivation village, us villagers were told we were being sent to a new land to cultivate. We followed them, only to be thrown into the slave-run mine. We had no crimes or debts, yet we were turned into slaves. Because of the harsh labor we were forced to do in the mine, my father, the village chief, my little sister and brother as well. There's no difference between the Hartner family and those bastards from the Amid Empire. My Nasan was treated as a plaything by the men. They're nothing but demons." Those from the 1st cultivation village, including Subas, the village chief's son, spoke of the sorrow they had endured at the slave-run mine. Even though they were from another village, they were friends who had been living in this cultivated land, just like the rest of the villages. Each village had many who recognized their faces. The other villagers got the feeling that the color of their eyes was a little different, but that was within acceptable limits of error. Thus, no matter how difficult it was to believe their words, it was impossible to completely reject them. And Lord Lucas Lucas, who is about to become in charge of the Hartner Duchy, tried to destroy this cultivation project. "Come on, talk," Subas said to Pablo, who had been captured alive. Pablo gave a groan before revealing everything, except for the details regarding Froto, the fake priest sent by Karkan. "My body, even my mouth, moves against my will. Why in the world?" Vandali had used spirit form transformation, split his claw into string-thin parts that extended to the knights who had been captured alive, and then used materialization inside their bodies. He was secreting various drugs from his claws in real time, forcing them into a state where they couldn't remain silent. But thanks to the numerous resistance skills that existed in Lambda, it was possible to resist the effects of drugs in ways that were scientifically impossible. "It's best to give up. You people don't want to end up like Inup, do you?" Vandali whispered to them, ensuring that they didn't regain their willpower and strength. He was also using his mental encroachment skill to inflict mental damage on them while slowly injecting more venom into them, little by little, and this was slowly beginning to take effect. I am Pablo Martin, the captain of the Red Wolf Knights Order. In order to have Lucas Sama succeed the Duke family, I created secret plans and ordered my subordinates to sabotage the cultivation villages. Hearing Pablo's confession and seeing the crest on the armor that he was wearing, the trust the villagers of the cultivation villages had in the Hartner Duchy plummeted to the ground. The concept of human rights was underdeveloped in Lambda, and those of royal or noble status were considered to be like a superior race to commoners. With that said, commoners still felt anger and dissatisfaction when trampled underfoot for absurd reasons. However, even if they did feel anger and dissatisfaction, there was a difference in power that prevented them from doing anything about it. It was meaningless for poor people living in cultivation villages to even think about opposing the Hartner family, who essentially ruled an entire nation. But there was no guarantee that they could keep living quietly like this. The next duke had dispatched a knight's order and demanded impossible amounts to be paid in taxes, and then told the villagers to tie ropes on themselves and become slaves because they had been unable to pay. It was difficult to imagine that the Hartner family would stay silent after the knight's order had been repelled, and the villagers couldn't just hope for the Hartner family to change its way of thinking. If they were going to be turned into slaves, didn't they have no choice but to run away and become bandits or something? Vandali whispered to the sorrowful villagers. "I'm sure you can no longer live in the Hartner Duchy. If you don't mind, won't you all come to me like Subas and the others have? Us survivors from the 1st cultivation village are all living under his rule," Subas continued. "We're living rich lives in a place where even the Hartner family can't touch us. We're eating until our stomachs are full every day, and there's even work for us to do." The villagers stirred and their eyes shone with hope. "Chief, me and my family are going to follow this child," said Kine, the hunter from the 5th cultivation village. Other villagers who had been directly saved by Vandali, just like Kine, raised their voices. The village leaders thought about the offer and then came to a decision. All right. Everyone, we must make preparations. This place could not become our second home. I am sure it will be difficult to start over again, but we have the guardian of the cultivation villages with us. We can make a new beginning anywhere. Isn't that right? Vandali repeated this process for all of the cultivation villages. And so, it was decided that over 1,000 villagers would migrate to Tailesheim. The villagers, who were now receiving the benefits of Vandali's strength and followers' skill, were working away to prepare for their migration. The Red Wolf Knight's order had been carrying messenger pigeons to contact Lord Lucas, but they had been seized as well. Now then, please write that everything is in order, Vandali requested. I don't recommend that you include a secret code to tell them that there is an emergency situation, he added. They probably won't make it in time anyway, but if by some chance they do, and I have no choice but to do what I have to in order to protect everyone, that would be bad for you, wouldn't it? Pablo showed no signs of resistance. Even he knew that the Hartner Duchy would suffer the least damage if Vandali and the others simply left. Things might be different if the 5 colored blades came, but they were adventurers, nothing more. They were unlikely to move to match Lord Lucas's needs. And the mastermind of all of this was a damp. The ones who had been acting unreasonably were Pablo and his men. Even if the Adventurers Guild learned of the situation, they were unlikely to side with the Knights, who were the ones who had carried out injustice. The Adventurers Guild probably wouldn't cause any direct trouble in the Hartner Duchy, though unlike the monstrosity before Pablo's eyes. What are you thinking? Why are you doing such a thing? Pablo asked Vandali, the fearsome monstrosity in the form of a child. What Vandali had done in this incident was different to repelling Karkan's men, who had disguised themselves as bandits. Unlike Karkan and his men, Pablo and his knights had been clearly recognizable as the Red Wolf Knights Order, and announced that they had come under formal orders from Lord Lucas, who represented Duke Hartner. Despite that, Vandali had incited the villagers, used military power to resist and slaughtered all of the knights except for a few. If this incident were to be discovered, the people might praise Vandali, but a bounty would be put on his head for treason and he would be hunted all over the nation. If he was caught, he wouldn't simply become a criminal slave, he would be unable to avoid execution. That was how serious Vandali's crime was. Why would he risk all of that to save the people of the cultivation villages? The rewards simply didn't make the risks. Considering the dirty methods that Vandali had used, Pablo couldn't imagine that he had been driven by a sense of justice. So just why had he done this? Pablo's questions weren't an attempt to negotiate or gather information. The monstrosity before his eyes was simply so incomprehensible that he couldn't help but ask. For the sake of my own happiness. The response Pablo received was also beyond his understanding. For the sake of your happiness? How does saving them lead to your happiness? He asked. Pablo couldn't imagine that Vandali stood to gain much here. Just what would he be able to do after gathering a group of poor cultivation villagers who had nobody supporting them? Even if he turned all of them into vampires, it was unlikely that this was worth the risk of opposing the Orborn Kingdom. Why do you doubt that saving everyone will lead to my happiness? Vandali asked. It seemed that he couldn't understand Pablo's doubt, either. I was simply passing by and there were people who were in trouble, so I helped them a little. Those people were happy, and I became happy as well. And then while I was helping them a little, we became close to each other and I made friends. And then people came to try and kill those friends and use dirty methods to take everything from them, so I helped them a little once more. Is it really that strange? This was the only reason Vandali had for being an ally of the cultivation villages. As a result, he had acquired the title, Guardian of the Cultivation Villages, but that was merely a result that followed everything else. It is said that even chance meetings are due to fate, and good you do to others is good you do to yourself. Vandali did have a little self-interest in mind, but if he were the kind of person who would consider wanting the villagers to be happy to be a detestable ulterior motive, he never would have gotten involved with other people to begin with. It just so happened that Vandali's idea of a little was relatively large. He had the fighting ability to light-heartedly dispose of goblin barbarians, orcs and bandits. He had the magic and mana to light-heartedly treat the injured and sick, remove the poison contaminating the fields and dig a well. Vandali hated the idea of the responsibility of those with power, but he wouldn't detest helping people a little out of kindness. In other words, this was normal. How can you give such a stupid excuse? For such a trivial reason, you turned us, the Hartner Duchy, into your enemies. It is even possible for the entire kingdom to turn on you. Pablo shouted, seemingly unable to accept this answer. Well, for such a trivial reason, you have all been exterminated, said Vandali. Pablo's eyes widened as he fell into silence. Won't this person's eyeballs fly out of their sockets if he keeps this up? Vandali thought as he continued speaking. The misunderstanding I don't want you to make is the assumption that I didn't intend to make the Hartner family my enemy from the beginning, he said. You people did a lot of things to others, so I simply did some things back. A lot of things, you say? Pablo wondered if Vandali was referring to the Karkan's reckless behavior, but he was wrong. Your ancestors murdered titans from Taylorsheim including Princess Livia, and sent the rest of the refugees to become slaves in a mine. Even after 200 years passed, you did not stop treating them as slaves. That's why I released the spirits of Princess Livia and the others, and rescued the refugees from the mine. You people had connections to the pure-breed vampires, so I revealed that. You people tried to destroy the cultivation villages, so I stopped you from doing that. You people caused everything. I simply acted in response. What? Then, all of the incidents that have been happening. Yes, I am the main culprit. This wasn't something that was easy to believe, but the monstrosity before Pablo's eyes had already accomplished a great number of unbelievable things. Pablo had been unaware of the conspiracy that had occurred 200 years ago, but he could imagine that the Duke Hartner back then had started something. In fact, Pablo and his men had been trying to do something similar in the cultivation villages, so it would have been stranger to think that the Duke's family of the past hadn't started anything. Demon, Pablo muttered. Demon? Vandali repeated. He was bewildered, he didn't understand why he was being called a demon. Yes, you're a demon, said Pablo. It would be stranger if you were not a demon. What you have done to the people you said you are protecting is not what can be considered sane. You turned the slaves you rescued into vampires, produced insects and plants from your body one after another, fanned the fires of anger and dissatisfaction the people felt for the Hartner Duchy, spoke pleasant words to them and incited them against us. And why have the people of the cultivation villages, who have seen the countless monsters and those who have transformed into vampires serving you, accepted that so easily? He demanded. Perhaps because everyone is open-minded? Vandali suggested. There is no way that is possible. That so easily? He demanded. Perhaps because everyone is open-minded? Vandali suggested. There is no way that is possible. You are manipulating them, aren't you? Pablo shouted. No, I really have no idea, said Vandali. Though I do think that everyone is very open-minded. None of the people of the cultivation villages felt any apprehension about the fact that Sabers and the others had been turned into subordinate vampires by Eleonora, or the fact that Vandali used insectoid and plant-type monsters. Especially those of the 7th cultivation village. Vandali had thought it strange, as death attribute charm wasn't affecting them, but hadn't read too much into it, assuming that it was because they were believers of Vida, the same assumption he had made with Gofor and the other Titan refugees. The truth was that it was the effect of the strengthened followers' skill. The moment the people of the cultivation villages chose to follow Vandali, they had become his followers. They felt a sense of familiarity and unity with Sabers and the other vampires, as well as Pete and the rest of the monsters, because they were all Vandali's followers as well. The strengthened followers' skill wasn't a skill that was supposed to work on members of other races, so nobody, not even Vandali himself, knew this. However, even if Vandali was aware of this, he probably wouldn't think of it as a bad thing. Well, I do admit that I stirred them up and instigated them, but is that a bad thing? Vandali asked. After all, right after you people tried to slaughter everyone in the cultivation villages, you tried to force unreasonable demands on them and turn them into slaves, intending to kill them if they disobeyed, didn't you? That is, Karkan you people are responsible for Karkan, so this was simply our response. As Pablo looked at Vandali, his vision blurred. His sweat, his cold sweat, had dripped into his eyes. He had decided that the damper in front of him was a monstrosity after all. Vandali was speaking logically and politely, in fact, Pablo even felt like Vandali had a point. But looking at Vandali's eyes, Pablo knew it. He knew that a monstrosity was before him. This monstrosity showed no hesitation to defy the absolute authority of the Hartner Duchy. He wasn't a champion of justice or a hero for the refugees. He was a demon who tempted people. Demons in fairy tales tempted people extremely kindly, and then they would guide the people on a path of evil. By the way, are you almost finished? Vandali asked. Pablo was startled by the question. He wondered just what kind of conversation he had been having with this demon. He hadn't been negotiating or gathering information. So, was it just idle talk? Impossible, it wasn't as calm as that. Every time he had opened his mouth, he had been staring at the monstrosity before his eyes with more and more interest, hadn't he? The monstrosity stood up from the log he had been sitting on, and his claws drew close to Pablo. For some reason, I am told that I'm insane, so I wanted to try talking to a normal person who is in a completely opposite position to mine, said Vandali. There were many points that I could understand. I felt like I did most of the talking in the end, but the time I spent on this conversation was very valuable. What are you planning to do? What will become of me? Asked Pablo. Please provide my apprentice with more valuable time as a guinea pig, said Vandali. Don't worry. It will be over much quicker than the time I spent as a guinea pig. The moment Pablo thought he felt a liquid dripping onto his face, his consciousness blacked out. The level of the grotesque mind skill has increased. Immediately after, a messenger pigeon delivered a message that read, "Nothing abnormal, everything is in order, contact with the Red Wolf Knight's order ceased." Spies were sent to investigate. What they found were empty cultivation villages and traces of a large number of people moving south. Lord Lucas sent more spies to learn more details, but they didn't gain any solid information at all. He tried hiring a capable spiritualist who was said to be living in Nierki, but it seemed that she had already closed her shop and either moved to another duchy or back to the elf village where she was born. In the city that was abandoned, or rather, forced to be abandoned, 200 years ago, in a place a short distance away from the cultivation villages, a small-scale dungeon with a single floor had appeared. Also, the tunnel that led to the southern region of the continent where Taylorsheim was should have been impossible to pass through as it had collapsed. But there were traces that the boulder at its entrance had moved. These were the only things that the spies were able to learn. Could it be that all of these events were caused by someone who crawled into the duchy from Taylorsheim? In spring, Lucas shuddered when he saw this report. He had formally succeeded the Hartner family. Of course, now that he had become the Duke, he knew of the absurd betrayal his predecessor had committed 200 years ago. Royalty and nobles created all kinds of enemies and allies through all sorts of methods. But when a new individual took over the family's headship, it was common for them to set the previous generation's deeds aside and mend previous relationships. There were some cases where a predecessor had said that certain families should never be forgiven, but even then, reconciliation usually happened a few generations later. But grudges of other races, especially those with long lifespans, were different. Even if the humans had changed generations, the other races' individuals were often still alive. Titans had lifespans of 300 years. And although this news arrived late, the spies that the Hartner family had sent into the Amid Empire delivered information to Lucas that an expedition army of 6,000 men sent by the Mage Shield Nation into the continent's southern region had returned as a swarm of thousands of undead. There was something in Taylorsheim, and that something was deeply malicious towards the Hartner family. There was no doubting that. Lucas had no way of knowing how that something was related to the cultivation villages, however. He didn't know that it was simply because the cultivation villages were close to Taylorsheim. The appearance of small-scale dungeons, the religion of Veda spreading among the farming villages, all of it is the doing of that someone, Lord Lucas murmured. Curse you, ancestors. Thanks to you, the Hartner family has earned the hatred of monstrosity. Lord Lucas announced that the Red Wolf Knight's order had moved to exterminate disaster-designated monster races that had settled into the ruins of the slave-run mine, where all of the men under Pablo's command lost their lives in exchange for those of the monsters. He also announced that the cultivation villages had been unable to be saved. And then he decided to build a fort in the city of Nierki to be prepared to fight the monster to the south of the continent. Incidentally, around this time, the Five Colored Blades were investigating the small-scale dungeons when they ran into and defeated some vampires who had come to do some investigating as well. With the information they gained from these vampires, they followed the trail of the pure-breed vampire Turnisha and left the Hartner Duchy. Vandali has gained the monstrosity title. Pan-fried gyoza, boiled gyoza, steamed meat dumplings, steamed buns, takoyaki, okonomiyaki, taiyaki, yakitori, hot dogs, frankfurters, kebabs, Cuban sandwiches, fresh spring rolls, chapati with meat, fish and vegetables, waffles, crepes, sherbet, fruit juice, hornworm skewers. All kinds of food that could be found at food stands on Earth and in origin were lined up, ready to be eaten. With this food in front of them, everyone's eyes sparkled as if they had laid eyes on some high-class dishes. Then they cheered. Wonderful! I've never seen any of these dishes before. I can't hold back anymore. Eat a dakimasu. And then they began eating with an intense vigor. Taylorsheim's usual members, with the addition of Luciliano, Kasim, Fester, Zeno and Lena, were here to enjoy the food. The dishes had been cooked by the craftsmen who had migrated from the cultivation village. Everyone was taking the food from the plates one after another and eating as if in a frenzy, even though they weren't being pressed to eat quickly. This gyoza, there are meat and vegetables inside? What juicy bread. I see, it's so delicious because the ingredients are wrapped in this thin bread. Even gyoza is considered bread in Lambda, I see, Vandali noted. Hey, bearded old man, this stir-fried bread called soba with vegetables and seafood is delicious, said Kasim. Those people from the country called Earth were pretty clever to think of stir-frying bread together with other ingredients. Kasim-kun, I am still in my 20s. Luciliano said indignantly. And that is not bread, they are called noodles. Cotton? Fester repeated. They're made of cotton? Cotton is edible, huh? Fester, it's good, so eat it. If you don't, your question can't be answered, can it? Said Lena. This round one is It's hot, but it's good. There's something creamy instead it. This fish bread is hot. It's sweet. Why is a bread with fish sweet? Zeno shouted. Zeno, where is your usual composure gone? It seemed that the food was well received by Taylorsheim's new citizens. Braga, Eleonora, Zadiris and the others who were already accustomed to eating this food were also enjoying it. The taste is different this time, but it is still delicious, said Eleonora. Yes, it seems that the takoyaki is filled with jam, and the yakisoba's sauce is made with fruit and spices rather than soy sauce and mayonnaise, Zadiris observed. There were many dishes that weren't difficult to reproduce as long as the method of making them were known and the ingredients were gathered. As for the necessary cookware, Vandali could make as many as was needed, as he was able to freely change the shape of wood and metal with Golem transmutation. He did have to work hard to make the equipment required to make Cuban sandwiches, which were made by putting ingredients between two buns and cooking it from both above and below, and kebabs, which were made by wrapping slices of meat into a cylindrical shape. So, what do you think? Vandali asked. If I continued selling these for 3 months at a food stall, do you think the Commerce Guild would accept it? He hadn't given up on becoming an adventurer. But he thought that he would have to use a bit of a roundabout method to do so. That roundabout method was to register at the Commerce Guild. When he registered at the Adventurers Guild, his status would be inspected, but Kasim and his friends knew of a way to avoid this, by presenting the registration card of another guild. The Commerce Guild, Mage's Guild, registration card of another guild, that meant his social status had already been checked. And then Vandali would be able to have his guild card made without having his status looked at by the guild employee. Incidentally, Dasa, Kaka and Borkus hadn't known of this registration method. The Adventurers Guild was the guild that was easiest to register at, so there was never a need to use such a roundabout method. Kasim and his friends had only learned of it through the only son of a traveling merchant, whom they had met at the adventurer training school. They had remembered that this person had said, I showed them my Commerce Guild registration card, so they didn't have to take my blood. Incidentally, that only son of a traveling merchant had registered at the Adventurers Guild not because he had been trying to seriously become an adventurer, but because the adventurer training school was the cheapest way to learn to defend himself. Vandali had chosen the Commerce Guild as the guild he would register at before registering at the Adventurers Guild. This food sampling feast was to get everyone's opinions on whether the food could be used to sell in order to fulfill the Commerce Guild's registration requirement of conducting business. I'm sure it will sell. There's no way something this delicious wouldn't sell, said Borkus. Oi Archie, the bits of food are falling out of the other side of your mouth, Gopher told him. We agree, said Sam. I'm sure they will sell, Botchan, said Rita. I know you're not using miso or soy sauce so that they don't stand out, but I think there won't be a problem, said Vigoro. There might be some who prefer it like this. The reason he hadn't used things like miso, soy sauce and mayonnaise was because it would be problematic if the Church of Elder learned that these flavorings were being used. It probably wouldn't become such a severe issue in the Orborn Kingdom, but people with extreme opinions existed everywhere. It would be problematic for Vandali to get involved with such people before he even entered society. Sweet Rapisage groaned. It's delicious. I'm sure everyone will buy them. Still, it was a relief that the food was quite popular, though. It is indeed delicious to the point of being emotionally moving, said Luciliano, who had experienced receiving special requests for him by name from multiple noblemen and wealthy merchants. However, He was wearing a difficult expression. "But there is a problem with selling it at stalls, master," he said. "Why?" Fester asked, before Vandali could even respond. "It's so delicious. I'd definitely buy it. How much would you buy it for?" Luciliano asked in turn. "How much, you say? Yes. The problem is the price," said Luciliano. "For example, this gyoza, these ingredients that are seasoned with these spices are expensive. The same goes for the steamed meat dumplings and the meat buns. The yakisoba is also full of luxurious ingredients, the kebabs and hot dogs, there is even butter in the Cuban sandwiches. Takoyaki uses a lot of oil, okonomiyaki requires fresh seafood, daiyaki needs jam and honey. There is an abundance of expensive flavors. No, it doesn't really matter if he sells it cheap, does it? Vandali's objective is to register at the guild, not to make a profit, Cassie pointed out. It's not like he's struggling to make a living. It was true that Vandali wasn't trying to make a living out of his food stand's sales, nor did he actually need to make a profit. In fact, what he wanted was to be conducting a business, so he wouldn't care at all if he made a loss. But Luciliano thought differently. "That is a naive way of thinking," he said. "If one sold dishes like this at a price that is clearly below the market, at a price that the masses can afford, what would the owners of other stores think?" "No matter how I think about it, I get the feeling that it'll cause trouble," said Kasim. "Exactly," said Luciliano. "Relationships with people are troublesome, aren't they? Then how about doing business in towns and villages that don't have any food stalls?" Vandali suggested. "Master, I do not believe there would be a commerce guild in such places," said Luciliano. There isn't a need to be a big success, so can't you just make and sell the same thing as the other food stands?" Lena suggested. "But it will hurt my conscience to make bad food and take money for it," said Vandali. Lena's suggestion was quite a safe option, but Vandali felt opposed to it. Lambda's stall food typically didn't taste very good. Of course, it was true that Vandali was picky with his food. The amount and affordability normally took priority over the taste, and it was important to be able to make it quickly with a limited amount of working space, so it wasn't very delicious. "Wouldn't it be better to set up a permanent store rather than a food stand?" Luciliano suggested. "The food that you make, master, is all things that even members of royal and noble families would eat." "The image I had of royalty and nobles has crumbled again," said Vandali. He felt dizzy just imagining dressed up, wealthy men and women having a banquet, giving elegant laughs of foo-fa-foo and oh-oh-ho as they conversed over yakisoba and takoyaki. "Once I decide on a place to set up business, I suppose I'll examine the prices of things being sold there before coming to a decision. Either way, I won't be able to do business until I get rid of some of the pure-breed vampires, so it will be some time in the future," said Vandali. "By the way, Van, why is your physical body lying down and not moving?" asked Bastia, who had noticed that the physical Vandali was lying face down in the corner of the room, completely still. "That is the one in charge of handling the depressing thoughts," replied the spirit form Vandali. "Who's the one who called me monstrosity? If I find them, I'll stick my claws in their ears and make their teeth rattle." Name, Kasim race, human age, 16 years old. Title, non-job, warrior level, 70. Job history, apprentice warrior. Passive skills, augmented stamina, level 2, new. Augmented vitality, level 2, new. Active skills, farming, level 1. Club technique, level 2, level up. Shield technique, level 3, level up. Armor technique, level 3, level up. Name, Xeno race, human age, 16 years old. Title, non-job, thief level, 67. Job history, apprentice thief. Passive skills, detect presence, level 2, level up. Intuition, level 1, new. Active skills, short sword technique, level 2, level up. Archery, level 2. Trap, level 2, level up. Erase presence, level 2, new. Dismantling, level 1, new. Unlocking, level 1, new. Name, Fester race, human age, 16 years old. Title, non-job, warrior level, 72. Job history, apprentice warrior. Passive skills, enhanced muscular strength, level 3, level up. Active skills, fishing, level 1. Swordsmanship, level 3, level up. Dismantling, level 1. Armor technique, level 1, new. Surpass limits, level 1, new. Chapter 94, The Half-Vampire's House Visit.
All right. Okay, guys. So will be the end for this stream for today. I finished the sketch quite fast compared to my old my old stuff that I did back then. But pretty much this is the design that I am planning to uh, finalize. I will color this, make sure to have the proper values, and I'll also put some background. And I'm excited to finish this so that I can see the result of the time lapse for this one from the beginning to the end. I enjoy watching time lapse so much, especially if I may it. Kind of boasting, tooting my own horn, huh? But anyway, other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. And for the story of that Mage doesn't want a fourth time, it's uh, I might say that sometimes I always forget that this story is kind of gory and also has given me a ton of fun and excitement every time I listen to the story of this Vandally. Just him getting depressed being called a monstrosity. uh, gives me chuckles. Yeah. Also, yeah, he's very savage too. Like, getting the guy being consumed by insects, being parasitized. I'm not sure what happened to him in the end. Also, if he got converted into an insect or something, I don't know. I can't remember. Let's just see what will happen in the near future as we continue to read the story. Whew. And also, I love how he can just like show how kind he is to these people and not worrying about the consequences that will happen because he is indeed strong already due to the skills that he gained and stuff like that. And he is now shy to use his ability to save these people's livelihood and them joining him. It's also causing him to get even stronger. Most of the some of the stories that I've read keeps telling that some of them, I may say that uh, they keep telling that being alone is better, being independent is what makes you even stronger. But as you can see from this story also that uh, Vandally is showing us that being with people, being with socializing with people is causing him great success. I guess being an extrovert will really be successful for this kind of type of story and type of lifestyle. And yeah, I'm kind of envious of his of this kind of style of story. Yeah, due to me being a very big introvert, I'm not capable of being too sociable, and communicating is kind of painful, I might say. But other than that, uh, yeah, I really wish I could have chances to be more friendlier to people and yeah, be like Vandally also to help others, keep them in mind. Hmm. So far, uh, we have listened to the story well, and let's just continue on with that in the next episode, or how may I say, uh, the next stream of me with the art with adventure. So yeah, we're actually very good with this sketch. I'm really satisfied with this. Mhm. I'll uh, she'll be, I think. I kind of based this on that episode of her getting wet from the rain when the mayor died. So I'm planning to put some water particles on her after this or next. Next stream. I don't know if I should sketch it or just straight up paint it later. Later on when I finished coloring it. Mm, yeah, it depends. I think it's more effective if I just paint it over rather than sketching it. It will cost a lot of time. So yeah, it will be also my first time maybe trying to make clothes a bit wet. Let's see what I can do with the coloring with this. Woo! Getting excited. I really want to try some methods that I've seen, some of the tutorials that I've watched, and also some methods that some people posted in their social media. I will be checking those up this coming this coming days to make sure to apply them in this artwork. But other than that, yeah, I'm still kind of busy with the other project that I'm doing right now. So this is just like a break from that project. So I did this really cute sketch of Wednesday. So yeah, other info about me is like I really enjoy, or I might say, I find goths really pretty. I think I started with a small crush with Raven from Teen Titans, and then that's like a downhill for me. I enjoy looking at god characters, and especially females. They're very attractive in my opinion, and I'll definitely make her very pretty once I finish coloring this. I'll try my best. But yeah, so this is the illustration. Hopefully I captured the anatomy right. I think it is. Yeah. Pretty good, pretty good. Alright, so yeah. That's enough of me talking. I'll end this stream now. And thank you very much once again for watching this stream. If you are looking at my VODs or something, please enjoy also the process of me sketching and then painting and adding finalizing the designs. I can see the full-on process, and also could enjoy the story while you're watching me doing the drawing. So yeah, all right. So I'll see you guys next time, and hopefully you would leave a like and subscribe to my channel if you find this entertaining enough to your taste, and hopefully we can make more of this live stream in the near future. Thank you again, guys, and this is your boy Shrimp, the ProDigal Shrimp, once again signing off. Bye bye.